Hey guys, tonight you find yourself standing in the blue-black hour before dawn, just outside a low-timbered house pressed against the inner wall of a market town, where the stone still holds yesterday's cold and the straw underfoot is damp enough to remind you that medieval comfort is mostly a rumour told by people with thicker cloaks than yours. Smoke hangs in the rafters of nearby sheds, drifting out in sleepy threads. And somewhere beyond the gate a horse stamps and breathes steam into the winter air like a small offended dragon. You can smell wet wool, old ash, river mist, and the faint iron tang of tools being cleaned in the dark. A bell sounds from a priory across the water, slow and hollow, and the muddy lane beside you glimmers with torchlight in a way that would look almost inviting if you had not already stepped ankle-deep into it. Medieval travel brochures really oversold this experience. You probably would not last a week out here, though to be fair, neither would most people who enjoy central heating and not finding rushes on the floor where rushes should never have been. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And do tell me your location and local time as you settle in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand there a moment longer, your hands tucked into your sleeves, while the little house before you begins to stir. It belongs to the barber, though belongs is slightly generous, because half the beams lean like tired men at the end of market day, and the roof appears to trust in prayer more than carpentry. Still, it has a door of oak, iron-banded and sturdy enough, and above it hangs a modest board painted with a basin and blade, swaying gently in the dawn breeze. No grand sign, no fine lettering, only the plain promise that within these walls a man may be shaved, trimmed, poulticed, bled, or at the very least listened to with professional seriousness. The latch lifts. A narrow seam of warm light opens into the lane. The barber himself steps out with a bucket in one hand and a bundled cloth under the other arm. He is smaller than you expect, broad in the shoulder, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak whose better years are already behind it. His beard is clipped close, naturally, and his hair is cut neatly around the ears in the practical style of a man who trusts his own hand with scissors. He squints at the sky as if negotiating with it. Then he throws the contents of yesterday's wash water into the gutter with a splash that makes a dog leap back in offence. The dog, thin and mud-coloured, watches from beneath a cart with the air of one who has seen all human professions and remains unimpressed by every last one. You follow the barber inside, ducking beneath the lintel. At once the world grows warmer, dimmer, and much more intimate. The room is narrow but deep, with soot-black rafters above and a floor scattered in places with old rushes that have been renewed often enough to count as effort, if not luxury. Beeswax candles burn low near a shelf, giving off that sweet, faint smell that always seems cleaner than the room around it. Along one wall stand basins of brass and glazed earthenware, a row of folded cloths, a water jug beaded with cold, and a stout wooden chair set in the best light from the front shutter. Nearby rests a chest bound with iron, the kind of chest that could contain coin, relics, or trouble. In this case, it contains the barber's tools, which is not so very different from the last two. You hear the bell again, more distant now, and somewhere behind the shop a hen complains to the morning as though dawn were an act of personal betrayal. The barber says little at first. He's a man of the early hour, and men of the early hour were never designed for cheerful conversation. Instead, he lays out his cloth, opens the shutter just enough to admit the grey light, and begins his careful preparations. A whetstone is set on the table. A razor is drawn from its case. He tests the edge with the side of his thumb, not foolishly, but with the ease of long habit. Then comes the stropping, slow and rhythmic, leather whispering beneath steel. It is an oddly soothing sound, almost like the drawing of a bow across a string. If bows were used to coax beards into obedience, this, you begin to understand, is not merely a place where hair is cut. It is a place where the body is negotiated with hair, beard, skin, blood, teeth, boils, swellings, headaches, vanity, bad luck. All of it may sooner or later come through this door. The medieval barber stands at a curious crossing point in the road of life. He is not a physician in the grand university sense, with Latin on his tongue and costly robes about his shoulders, nor is he merely the fellow who tidies the edges of your beard before feast day. He is something in between, and because of that, perhaps stranger than either. The barber takes a small pot from the shelf and lifts the lid. Soap, thick and plain. He sniffs it with suspicion, as if checking whether it has become someone else's soap in the night. Satisfied, he sets it down beside a bowl and feeds a bit of kindling into the hearth. The fire wakes reluctantly. A lick of orange light catches on the brass basin and makes the room briefly look richer than it is. Outside, the town begins to murmur. A cartwheel grinds over frozen ruts. Somewhere a woman opens shutters and shakes crumbs into the lane. The river mist still lingers low near the wall, and through the crack in the shutter you see torchlight moving near the gate, where the watch is changing. The world is coming into focus by degrees, not with sudden brightness, but with the slow honesty of winter dawn. On a peg hangs a half-burned candle stub saved for later. On another hangs a satchel of dried herbs. You catch the smell of rosemary, rue, and something sharper you cannot name. Medieval rooms always smell as though somebody's trying very hard to improve them and losing by a narrow margin. The barber opens the iron-bound chest. Inside lies the true strangeness of his calling. Razors, certainly, shears of several sizes, small combs of bone, tweezers, a lancet wrapped in cloth, bandages rolled tight, little packets of powders, a horn cup, a few leeches in a stoppered jar, slow and black in their dark water like patient thoughts. There is a tooth drawer too, plain and stout, and you decide at once not to think about it. Some swear that barbers learn half their skill from masters, and half from watching what makes people faint. No one can quite agree whether that is a joke or a professional rule. The barber touches each item with the grave attention of a priest arranging altar vessels. That is what surprises you most, not the steel itself, nor the fact that one man may shave a chin at sunrise and open a vein by noon, but the calm with which he moves between those worlds. There is no flourish to him, no theatrical menace, only method. Cloth here, blade there, water heating, candle trimmed, bench drawn closer to the light. He notices you looking at the leech jar and gives the smallest possible grunt of amusement. You're not the first to find the morning unexpectedly educational. He sets the jar back. On the table he places a bowl and fills it from the jug. The sound of water in the quiet room is round and gentle. Then he adds a cloth to warm by the fire. Soon the first customer will arrive, some trader wanting his beard cleaned before market, or a messenger with stubble enough to suggest both poor planning and worse sleep. The barber knows the rhythm. He knows who comes in before dawn and who waits till after ale. He likely knows whose hands shake from cold and whose from guilt. You drift near the doorway and look back out into the lane. The dog has moved closer now, curling beside the threshold as though it has appointed itself guardian of the premises. It blinks up at you, then at the barber, then decides that warm floors and scraps are worth more than dignity. A sensible creature. A pair of apprentices passes carrying baskets of coarse bread. The smell rich and yeasty in the cold. You hear geese further off, a child coughing behind an oak door, a woman calling for someone named Martin, with the tone that suggests Martin has disappointed everybody before breakfast. Over all of it, the monastery bells begin again, marking the hour with that measured patience medieval life trusts more than clocks. Time here is not glanced at, it is heard. The barber finally speaks, voice rough from sleep, cold enough to crack saints. It is the sort of line a man says every winter until he dies, and for that reason it feels eternal. He bends to adjust the stool by the chair, then lays out a clean cloth across its back. Clean is a relative term, of course, but respectable by the standards of the age, which is more than you can say for most things within 100 yards. He wipes the razor once more, though it plainly does not need it. Habit again. Reassurance, perhaps. Barbers sell steadiness almost as much as skill. Those who tell the tale never fully agree about when barbering began to stretch beyond grooming into treatment and minor surgery. Some say need did it, some say monasteries did, because monks required shaved crowns and practical hands were never kept idle long. Some swear the old Roman habit of baths and blades never quite vanished, only changed coats and accents. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the barber became healer by ambition or by the simple medieval rule that if you own a sharp knife, somebody will eventually ask you to use it for more than bread. A fist raps at the door. The barber does not startle. He only reaches for the warmed cloth, lifts the latch, and lets in the first breath of morning business along with a gust of cold air and a man whose beard arrives half a moment before the rest of him. You step aside, deeper into the candle glow, as the day finally begins. The man who enters brings the weather in with him, along with the smell of horse leather, wet wool, and the faint sour trace of having slept too little and too close to other men in some draughty lodging. Frost pearls at the edge of his beard, his nose is red from the lane outside, and his boots leave dark half-moons of mud on the threshold before he stamps them once, apologetically, as though mud and winter are both unfortunate personal habits. The barber closes the door behind him, and at once the room seems smaller, warmer, more secretive. Dawn lingers outside like a pale thought, but in here the candlelight and the hearth pull everything inward. The customer is a trader by the look of him, or perhaps a messenger. Medieval towns are full of men who appear to be both at once always in motion, always carrying news, debts, parcels, gossip, or onions. He rubs his hands over the fire and gives the barber a nod of weary familiarity. "Make me decent," he mutters. It is a large request for such a small room, but the barber accepts it without visible alarm. You watch as the barber settles him into the chair by the shutter, draping the cloth around his neck with a practiced flourish, so modest it barely counts as a flourish at all. The warmed cloth comes next, laid across the beard and jaw. Steam rises faintly where heat meets cold skin. The man exhales in a way that suggests this, right here, may be the kindest thing anyone does for him all week. There is something intimate about the first part of a shave, before any blade touches skin. The barber stands close, not hurried, not careless, and the room grows quiet except for the pop of the fire and the creak of leather as the customer shifts in the chair. Outside, the lane is waking in earnest. You hear wheels, hooves, a woman laughing once, then coughing, and the far-off bark of a dog that sounds suspiciously like the mud-coloured one still dozing by the threshold. Somewhere down the street a peddler has begun calling out smoked fish before the sun has even done the decent thing and risen. The barber dips his fingers into the bowl and stirs the soap. It is thick, plain stuff, made with fats and ash and no illusions whatever. He works it into a lather with a brush until the small room smells faintly of tallow and herbs. Not luxury, exactly, but order. Order matters here. It is what turns a man being scraped with steel into a service rather than a grim misunderstanding. Soon the customer's beard is whitened with foam, and you can hardly help noticing how vulnerable he looks under it. Chin lifted, throat exposed, all the swagger of the outside world wrapped now in a cloth and entrusted to another man's steady hand. Perhaps that is one reason people talk so much in a barber's shop. Silence makes the razor feel sharper. The trader begins almost at once. He speaks of the road from the western villages, where the ruts are deep enough to swallow a small cart and half a prayer. He complains of a broken axle near the river ford, of tolls at the gate, of a priest who charged extra for blessing a mule because, in his words, the beast seemed unusually sinful. The barber gives only small answers, a grunt here, a nod there, but he misses nothing. Each pass of the razor is clean and deliberate. The blade whispering down cheek and jaw with a sound so soft it nearly disappears beneath the fire. You begin to see that morning gossip is one of the barber's invisible tools. Men arrive wanting to look better, yes, but also wanting to unburden themselves without quite admitting it. The barber hears complaints about rent, rumours of marriage, whispers of spoiled grain, mutterings about market tolls, concerns over chilblains, and the occasional confession disguised as weather talk. He listens with the face of a man checking a beard line, though you suspect he is quietly sorting the town into its usual categories: who is ill, who is in debt, who is vain, who is lucky, and who is pretending very bravely to be all right. No one can quite agree whether a barber keeps secrets better than a priest. A priest hears sins dressed in theology. A barber hears them in plain speech with soap on the speaker's face. Some swear that if you want the truth in a medieval town, you ask the woman at the bakehouse. Others insist you ask the barber and pay him for a shave, because men confess more freely when they cannot turn their heads. The trader lowers his voice. He says the Reeves' eldest son has returned from another town with a velvet cap, a swollen opinion of himself, and, according to one version of events, lice elegant enough to deserve their own coat of arms. The barber's mouth twitches once at the corner. That is as close as he comes to open delight. Then the trader asks after a widow who keeps a stall in the square, and here the barber becomes very attentive indeed to the line beneath the chin. A strategic silence, perhaps, or professional ethics, or simple enjoyment. You begin to suspect that a barber's shop runs partly on hot water and partly on withholding reaction at exactly the right moment. The shave goes on, the second side, then the careful stretch beneath the jaw. The cloth is lifted, wiped, folded, warmed again. Such little actions, all of them, and yet they carry the gravity of ritual. Medieval life has surprisingly few experiences that are both comfortable and organized. This is one of them. A chair in the firelight, a cloth on the face, the smell of soap, the certainty that at least one person in town knows precisely what ought to happen next. Once the beard is trimmed down, the barber takes up shears and tidies the hair about the ears, snip by snip. The room fills with tiny fallen threads of brown and grey. Hair lands on the cloth, the floor, the customer's shoulders, and the dog's nose when the creature wanders close enough to investigate. The dog sneezes with dignified irritation and retreats to the warmest patch of rushes. A hard-working member of the establishment, clearly. The barber rubs a little scented water, very little, because this is the Middle Ages, not a royal wedding into the man's beard line. He checks the cheeks, the chin, the upper lip. The trader touches his own face with obvious relief, as though the new neatness might improve his fortunes by at least 10%. In this world it just might. Appearance is never merely appearance. A groomed beard suggests solvency, seriousness, readiness for trade, and perhaps fewer fleas. One must take all the advantages one can get. The first customer pays in small coin and gratitude disguised as grumbling. Then he steps back into the cold, transformed only slightly, which in a medieval winter is transformation enough. He is scarcely gone before another arrives. This one is a younger man with a downy beard that has ambitions far greater than its achievements. He wears a cap too fine for his station and keeps checking his reflection in the polished brass basin when he thinks nobody notices. Vanity enters the room like a draught and settles everywhere. You recognize the type at once. Every century manufactures him in bulk. He wants the beard shaped, a term which here means coaxing several uncertain patches of hair into looking intentional. The barber says nothing unkind, which is merciful. He seats the young man, drapes him, and begins trimming with the kind of expression a mason might wear while repairing decorative cracks in a very small wall. As he works, the young man talks too quickly. He's going to the market square. There's a girl there who sells ribbons, or perhaps her uncle sells ribbons and she merely stands near them in a way that has ruined his appetite. He asks the barber whether a narrower line at the cheek looks more soldierly. The barber replies that it looks narrower. It is a masterful answer, absolutely useless and therefore perfectly safe. The young man also asks whether goose fat is truly good for making hair shine. Here you receive one of the first truly strange little lessons of the day. Medieval grooming is full of such notions. Goose fat, rosemary oil, bear grease if you are rich or gullible, egg white, ash mixtures, herbal rinses, all promised in one quarter or another to thicken hair, soften skin, chase away spots, or make a beard curl like that of a saint in a painted panel. Some swear by singed rosemary for keeping lice from the scalp. Others hang little charms over the bed, or tuck a pilgrim badge near the wash basin, as though holiness and personal grooming might cooperate more often if introduced properly. Even now, it is hard to tell whether people trust remedies because they work, because they are old, or because a man feels less foolish applying goose fat than admitting he has no control over his own face. The barber uses none of these theatrical methods just now, only scissors, comb, and a patience that should perhaps be venerated. He snips the beard into something sharper at the chin, trims the upper lip, smooths the hair over the ears, and finally presents the polished basin as a crude mirror. The young man studies himself with the concentrated seriousness of someone who has never fought a war, but is prepared to win a ribbon stall by sheer symmetry. He leaves pleased, which is as much reward as any artisan can ask. The room quiets for a moment. The barber gathers clippings from the cloth and tosses them into the fire, where they curl and vanish in a quick, bitter smell. He rinses the razor, he wipes the comb, he folds the cloth again. Everything returns to its place. This, you realize, is part of the morning music, not only the work, but the resetting after the work. The way the room is made ready over and over, as though tidiness itself were one more defense against the muddy uncertainty outside. Through the shutter you can see more of the town now. Grey light has thickened into morning. A pair of women with baskets move toward the square. A priest with cold hands tucked into his sleeves glides past, followed by a boy carrying what appears to be a book larger than his prospects. Somewhere a forge begins to ring. The bell from the priory rolls again through the mist, and each note seems to settle in the beams above your head. Then comes the third visitor, and he is not here for vanity. He's an old mason with cracked hands, white mortar still clinging to one cuff, and he enters holding his cheek with the tender, suspicious expression of a man betrayed by a tooth in the night. The barber takes one look and points him not to the chair by the window, but to the bench near the fire. So this, too, belongs to the morning. The barber sets aside the shaving bowl and reaches instead for a smaller cloth, a little packet of herbs, and the iron-bound chest whose stranger contents wait patiently under the candlelight. The old mason sits down with a groan and says he has not slept. The whole left side of his face throbs, and his neighbour swears a clove of garlic in the ear will draw out the evil humours, which has apparently succeeded only in making him smell like supper. The barber nods as though this is a perfectly ordinary route to dawn. In a medieval barber's room, it usually is. The old mason is settled on the bench near the fire with one hand pressed to his jaw, while the garlic remedy continues to announce itself to the room with heroic confidence. The barber gives no sign of judgment. This, too, is part of the work receiving people in the condition they arrive, whether they bring vanity, gossip, or an ear that smells faintly like a roasting trencher's feast gone very wrong. He unwraps the little packet of herbs, lets a few dried leaves fall into a cup, and pours over them a measure of hot water from the kettle hanging at the hearth. Steam rises at once, carrying a bitter scent through the beeswax sweetness of the candles. You remain near the front of the room, where the grey morning has now turned to a thin silver day beyond the shutter. A woman passes outside carrying coarse bread on a board covered with linen. Two apprentices hurry by with tools over their shoulders, both pretending not to run and failing in different ways. The dog by the threshold has reawakened and now watches the mason with grave interest, perhaps sensing pain, perhaps hoping garlic may somehow become edible. Medieval dogs are practical philosophers. The barber hands the mason the steaming cup and tells him to hold it near the aching side and breathe. The man obeys with the skepticism of someone who wants the world fixed immediately and has long ago learned that it rarely cooperates. While the herbs do their humble work, the barber turns back to the chair by the shutter. A fresh customer has arrived, and this one is very much here for appearance. He is a cloth merchant, thick through the middle, with red cheeks and a fur-lined cap that suggests modest prosperity expressed as loudly as possible. He smells of damp wool bales, fennel seeds, and the small anxieties of a man who depends on other men liking him just enough to pay full price. He greets the barber by name, glances once at the mason's miserable posture, and then lowers himself into the chair with the solemnity of a bishop approaching a throne. "Trim it neat," he says, stroking his beard, not narrow, respectable. This particular beard has clearly been in negotiations with respectability for many years. It is thick at the jaw, slightly rebellious beneath the chin, and threaded with a few pale strands that the merchant treats as if they were acts of personal betrayal. The barber tucks the cloth around him, combs through the beard, and begins trimming with small deliberate snips that seem almost too modest to matter until, little by little, the entire face begins to look more orderly, more composed, more in command of its own business. That is the strange thing about barbering in this world. The tools are simple, the room is humble, the floor still contains rushes that have seen too much of life. Yet transformation happens here in quiet, practical ways. A man enters looking like he has slept under a cart. He leaves looking like he might negotiate wool contracts, supervise tenants, or at least avoid frightening children. The merchant talks throughout, though he keeps one eye on the barber's hand, as all men do when steel approaches the soft parts of their pride. He complains of moths in a shipment from the north, of market tolls, of a rival trader who uses too much scent and not enough honesty. He notes, with the satisfaction of one delivering public service, that a baker's daughter is to marry a cooper's son, and that no one can quite agree whether the dowry includes geese, linen, or merely expectations. The barber offers brief replies and never wastes a movement. Comb, trim, step back, check the line, trim again. You notice how the light from the shutter falls across the merchant's face and turns the floating clipped hairs almost golden in the air. Beyond him, the wall shelf holds its little row of objects: bone combs, folded cloths, jars with tied parchment labels, a brass basin polished unevenly by years of hands, and the half-burned candle stub you noticed earlier, waiting its turn. The room feels smaller now, busier, and warmer from all the breathing. Smoke clings to the rafters in soft layers. Every time the door opens, a blade of cold air cuts through the heat and vanishes again. The barber begins on the moustache, trimming carefully around the lip. The merchant goes still at once, his confidence evaporating in favour of total concentration. There is no vanity quite as fragile as a man pretending not to care how his moustache looks. Outside, a bell rings from the priory, marking another turn of the morning. Time here arrives in sound and routine bells, fires, carts, prayers, knives on boards, geese objecting to existence. In towns like this, the barber's shop becomes a kind of listening post. He hears the first voices of the day before many others do. He hears who has travelled, who has quarrelled, who has woken with swelling, who has come in from a manor, who has money enough to ask for scented oil, and who only has enough to ask for mercy. Some swear that hair cut at the waxing moon grows thicker, while hair taken at the waning moon grows slower and lies better under a cap. Others insist a child's first haircut should be kept, hidden, or burned with care, lest birds steal the strands for nests and give the child headaches or wandering thoughts. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether such beliefs come from old wisdom, old fear, or simply the fact that once hair leaves the head it feels mysteriously too personal to throw away like cabbage leaves. In a world full of saints' relics, charms, and blessings muttered over ordinary things, even clippings from a beard can seem to hold a little of a man's fortune. The barber gathers what falls on the cloth and sweeps some of it into a small pile with the side of his comb. He does not speak of moons or birds, but neither does he let hair scatter everywhere. A practical man may still respect the habits of others, especially when they pay in coin. The merchant wants the cheeks cleaned more sharply, so the barber turns to the razor again. He strops it once, tests the edge, and wets the upper line of beard. The sound returns, that soft whisper of steel against skin. The merchant, who moments before had plenty to say about wool and taxes, becomes reverently silent. It is difficult to complain about tolls while someone is refining your jawline with a blade. On the bench, the mason finally lowers the cup and mutters that the heat helps a little. The barber glances over, then crosses to him, leaving the merchant half-soaped but not alarmingly so. He checks the swollen cheek with a thumb and finger, then asks a few brief questions. How long fever can he chew? Has the pain moved toward the ear? The old man answers through a clenched face. The barber nods, as if all this fits within his expectations of a Thursday or whatever passes for Thursday in a world ordered mainly by bells and saints' days. He pinches a little powder from a parchment fold and adds it to a dab of honey in a spoon, stirring it with the end of a twig, a remedy humble enough to be believable. He tells the mason to press it near the sore gum when it cools. Clove, perhaps, or willow bark, or something else half learned from an older hand and half confirmed by watching what helps men survive the night. Medieval treatment often feels like a conversation between memory and desperation. Then he returns to the merchant and resumes the shave exactly where he left it, as if switching from tooth pain to beard geometry requires no more emotional adjustment than moving a bowl 2 inches to the left. You begin to feel the rhythm of the room as surely as if you had worked here yourself. Warm cloth, razor, rinse, clip, listen, tender complaint, return to the beard, take payment, wipe the blade, feed the fire, move the stool, straighten the cloth, hear another rumour, check another cheek. It is all one stream, one long braided trade made up of grooming, mending, steadying, and politely enduring the opinions of men who believe their own beards deserve royal attention. The merchant is nearly finished now, and his face has acquired that lifted, clarified look which follows even the simplest care. The barber smooths a little oil rosemary and perhaps a trace of sage between his palms and works it through the beard ends. Not enough to make him glossy, only enough to calm the roughness. The smell is green and clean and oddly comforting, a reminder that herbs enter every part of medieval life sooner or later in pottage, in physic, in prayers, in smoke, in hair. The merchant inspects himself in the basin's dim reflection and declares the work solid, which in his mouth seems to mean excellent but paid for as though it were merely adequate. He leaves a few clipped hairs behind on the cloth, a coin on the table, and the lingering scent of wool. No sooner has he gone than the next man appears in the doorway, tall and narrow, with the unmistakable look of someone trying to seem more important than the weather is allowed. He wears the livery colours of a local household, though frayed at one cuff, and his boots are splashed nearly to the ankle. A servant, perhaps, or a junior retainer from one of the better houses near the market square. He ducks inside and glances around the room with the careful unease of a man who is not used to waiting among tradesmen, yet has plainly been sent to do exactly that. He says his master wants him put in better order before the noon meal. The barber nods, and the phrase alone tells you much. Appearance matters upward as much as downward. Even the least impressive link in a noble household must sometimes be polished, if only to reassure the household that hierarchy is functioning. While the retainer waits, the barber finally turns his full attention back to the old mason. The honey mixture has cooled. He shows the man how to press it near the aching gum, and hands him a strip of linen to hold against the cheek. The mason obeys, grumbling but grateful. You can see the lines in his face ease by a fraction. A tiny victory. But in this century, tiny victories often count as the only kind available before noon. The barber asks whether the mason has tried rinsing with warm salt water. The man says yes, though from his tone it is clear he considers all instructions insulting until proven useful. He also says his neighbour advised carrying a wolf's tooth in the purse against pains of the jaw. Some swear that works. Others prefer a charm written on scrap parchment and hung at the neck, even now. It is hard to tell whether people trust such things because they expect miracles or because pain makes every story sound reasonable. The barber, to his credit, does not laugh. He only says that if the wolf's tooth fails, the warm rinse should still be continued. It is exactly the sort of answer that lets belief keep its dignity, while practical treatment quietly does the heavy lifting. Now the tall retainer takes the chair. His hair is overgrown at the neck, his beard sparse at the cheeks and heavier on the chin, and he smells faintly of stable yard, lamp smoke, and damp hay. The barber drapes him and begins combing. The retainer sits straighter than the others, as if posture alone may improve his rank. You almost admire the effort. As the scissors begin their measured work, you feel the room settle again into that peculiar balance of service and observation. Hair falls, Fire mutters. The dog sighs in its sleep. Outside, the town has fully woken, but inside the barber's shop the morning remains enclosed and almost ceremonial. Here, under sooty rafters and beside beeswax candles, appearance is shaped with care, discomfort is met with herbs and patience, and every face that enters leaves carrying a slightly different version of itself. By the time the barber lifts the razor to refine the retainer's jaw, you understand why his trade seems stranger the longer you watch it. He is not merely cutting hair, he is preparing people for the roles they must go out and play: merchant, servant, mason, suitor, gossip, sufferer, respectable citizen with only moderate garlic about the person. And he does it with steel, soap, hot water, and a steadiness more valuable than half the charms in town. The day is only beginning, and already the room has become a small theatre of medieval life, trimmed neatly around the ears. The retainer sits stiff in the chair while the barber draws the razor down the line of his jaw, and for a few moments the whole room narrows to the quiet precision of that motion. The fire gives a low sigh behind you. Candlelight trembles across the brass basin. Outside, cartwheels pass over the ruts with the dull complaint of wood against cold earth. But in here everything is held close and steady. The barber wipes the blade, tilts the man's chin a little higher, and clears the last rough shadow from beneath the ear. When he is done, the retainer touches his face as if surprised to find a more orderly version of himself waiting there. He pays with his master's coin, which always lands on the table with a confidence personal coin never quite manages, and goes back into the day smelling of soap instead of stable straw. The old mason rises more slowly from the bench, one hand still to his cheek, though the herbal honey has softened his expression by a degree. He mutters thanks in the half-embarrassed tone of a man who would rather lift stone than admit relief. Then he too is gone, taking his garlic aura with him like a weather system finally moving on. For a brief little while the room empties. The barber closes the shutter a little against the draught and stands still beside the table. He rubs one thumb over the heel of his hand where the razor has pressed all morning. The movement is small, but you notice it. So much of this trade depends on hands that must not shake. Hands that must gauge pressure, sharpness, swelling, heat, thickness, tenderness, bone beneath skin. In a medieval town, many people labour until their fingers grow blunt with cold and work. The barber must do the opposite. His fingers must remain sensitive enough to feel the difference between stubble and trouble. He goes to the iron-bound chest. This time, when he opens it, you're looking not with first curiosity but with growing recognition, as though the chest itself is another morning customer whose face is becoming familiar. The usual tools gleam dully in the candlelight: razors, shears, combs, tweezers. Yet now he lifts out other things and sets them in a row on the table with the calm of long habit. A small bundle of folded linen bandages, a narrow lancet with a handle dark from use, a shallow bowl, a length of cord, a jar of salve, a horn cup, and, after only a brief glance to judge the light, the stoppered leech jar, which he places near the basin where the creatures drift slow and black in their water, like monks with no urgent appointments. So this is where the day changes shape. A barber in this world lives with one foot in ordinary grooming and the other in the old, uneasy kingdom of bodily remedies. The line between the two is not nearly as clear here as your modern instincts would prefer. The man who trims a beard may also open a vein. The same steady hand that shapes a moustache may lance a swelling, clean a wound, pull a tooth, or apply cups and poultices according to the local custom. Medieval life does not always separate roles into neat cupboards. If a person owns blades, linens, and enough nerve, society begins to make requests. No one can quite agree whether barbers first became minor healers because they were convenient, because they were skilled with sharp instruments, or because physicians with university manners did not always wish to dirty their hands with the humbler facts of flesh. Some say learned doctors preferred theory, pulses, and expensive advice, while barbers managed the practical end of suffering down where the blood actually was. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but the result sits before you in plain view a work table where soap and lancets share the same light. The barber tests the edge of the lancet, then wraps it again. He checks the bandages, folds them once more, and warms a cloth by the fire. The little room changes around these preparations. It is still the same room, still smelling of herbs and tallow and wet wool from the morning traffic. But something in its mood grows more attentive. A shaving shop feels conversational. A room where blood may soon be let feels quieter, even before anyone speaks. You hear the next customer before he appears, not because he is loud, but because another man follows him to the door and says, "Go on, then." It always helps. That is never the tone used for haircuts. The customer who enters is broad and middle-aged, wearing a decent wool coat and the tired face of someone who has slept badly for several nights in a row. His complexion is ruddy under the winter pallor, and his eyes look heavy, as though his own head has become an item he is obliged to carry rather than inhabit. He removes his cap, greets the barber with reluctant familiarity, and glances toward the tools on the table. "Too much pressure again," he says, pressing 2 fingers to his temple and a pounding behind the eyes. The barber nods once, unsurprised. A complaint like this lives squarely within the medieval habit of explanation. Headache, heaviness, flushed skin, restless sleep, fullness in the veins, such things are often read as signs that the body has become unbalanced, the humours crowding in their own disagreeable way. Blood is thought too abundant, too heated, too eager, and when too much seems to be the trouble, taking some away has an almost irresistible logic to it. You would not necessarily volunteer for that logic, but then you're not living with their map of the body. Here, health is balance, and imbalance invites intervention. Gentle intervention when possible, sharper when needed. The man sits not in the barber's grandest chair by the shutter, but on a sturdier stool near the table. The barber drapes a cloth over one shoulder, then rolls the sleeve back from the forearm. He ties the cord above the elbow with a practiced pull and asks the man to open and close his fist. The vein rises faintly under the skin. The barber studies it with total calm. There is nothing theatrical in the moment that surprises you more than anything. No drama, no dread, no sinister flourish. Only method, bowl placed, cloth ready, hand steady. The customer looking not heroic, not terrified, merely inconvenienced by the ordinary burdens of being a body in the Middle Ages. The barber cleans the skin with warm wine and herbs. The smell lifts sharp into the air. He murmurs something brief, not a prayer exactly, not entirely, not a prayer, and then with the narrowest motion brings the lancet to the vein. It is done so quickly, you almost miss it. The man exhales. The barber holds the bowl beneath and watches with the focused patience of a miller judging grain. Not too much, not too little, just enough, according to his sense, the customer's symptoms, the season, the man's strength, perhaps even the phase of the moon, if the neighbourhood opinions grow noisy enough. Medieval treatment is never one thing only. It is always braided from observation, custom, authority, old sayings, and the unkillable hope that somewhere between them lies relief. Some swear certain days are luckier for bloodletting than others, and almanacs in some regions even note which parts of the body ought not be touched under particular signs of the zodiac. A cautious person might avoid opening a vein when the moon stands unfavourably over the corresponding member. Others pay little mind to stars and more to the colour of the face before them. Even now, it is hard to tell where calculation ends and confidence begins. The barber loosens the cord, presses the warmed cloth to the small wound, then binds it with linen. The man sits still for a moment, blinking as though the room has shifted a little farther away and then settled again. The barber gives him watered ale and tells him not to hurry back into the cold. Sensible advice, which has probably competed all century with less sensible advice and somehow survived. You watch the bowl being carried aside, the cloth rinsed, the bandage checked. The act is over almost before your mind has finished catching up to it. A barber may move from beard trimming to bloodletting with the ease of someone turning a page. That is the strangeness of the trade. The same room that held market gossip before sunrise now contains a ritual of bodily correction, all under the same rafters, with the same dog asleep by the door. The next case is different. A woman arrives with her brother, though she herself does not come inside. That boundary is quietly observed. She remains at the threshold under her cloak, cheeks reddened by the cold, while the young man beside her enters holding his hand wrapped in linen darkened at the palm. He has caught it badly on a cooper's hoop or a cart fitting, something iron-edged and unhelpful. The barber waves him to the bench near the fire and unwinds the cloth. It is not a grave injury, but it is ugly enough to make the young man look pale under the skin. The barber says nothing soothing. Medieval reassurance tends to be practical to the point of insult. He warms water, adds wine, and washes the cut while the fellow hisses through his teeth and tries not to disgrace his ancestry. You rather admire him. Wounded dignity is still dignity. The barber examines the edges, checks whether grit remains, and presses gently around the palm. Then he applies a salve that smells of honey, plantain, and perhaps comfrey, before binding the hand with firm, economical turns of linen. He tells the young man to keep it clean, keep it dry, and not to work like an idiot for a day or two. The last instruction is almost certainly the least likely to be followed. From the threshold, the sister asks whether a charm from St. Apollonia would help, though that saint is more often called for tooth pain than sliced palms. The barber replies that saints help where they are willing, but clean bandages help where they are present. It is a fine answer, respectful enough to pass without argument and sensible enough to be worth hearing. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how much medieval healing belongs to herbs, how much to prayer, and how much to the plain advantage of washing dirt out of the problem before it grows ambitions. Most people seem to prefer all three if available. In uncertain times, remedies accumulate like blankets. The brother leaves with his hand swaddled, his pride somewhat less neatly tied. The sister nods thanks and vanishes into the lane. The barber washes up again, slower now. Water pinks, clears, is emptied. Cloths are wrung, the lancet is wiped, the salve pot closed, the bandage roll returned to the chest. Every act is measured, unshowy, and quietly important. In a world without sterile white rooms and polished metal trays, care still exists. It just wears wool and smells faintly of smoke. Then comes a small boy, led by her grandmother, with a swelling at the side of his neck that may be no more than a troublesome gland or may, by evening gossip, become 3 different legends and a warning from someone's cousin. The grandmother swears it appeared after he slept near a draught. Another neighbour insists such lumps come from spiteful air passing over churchyard stones. Some swear that tying red thread about the wrist draws the illness downward and out. The barber listens, touches the swelling lightly, and prepares a warm poultice, you notice how gently he handles the boy. Not indulgently, not sweetly, gently in the brisk medieval way that assumes children are small, resilient peasants with feelings to be acknowledged after the remedy is in place. He warms the poultice, binds it at the neck, and tells the grandmother what signs to watch for. Fever, worse swelling, trouble swallowing. Come back if those begin. Again observation, practical instruction, no fuss. By now the little room feels transformed from what it was at dawn, though none of its objects have truly changed. The chair still waits by the shutter for the next beard. The brass basin still catches the candlelight. The dog still sleeps as if paid for it. But you have seen the trade open out into its stranger depths. A barber's day is not divided into neat halves. First hair, then healing. It all mingles. Appearance, pain, blood, poultices, gossip, skill, guesswork, warmth, and the old medieval conviction that the body may be coaxed back toward balance if only the right hand and the right custom meet at the right moment. The barber closes the chest halfway, but not entirely. There will be more need before the day is done. There always is. He stands for a moment by the fire, rubbing his hands together to warm the fingers that must remain clever. Outside, the light has strengthened toward late morning. More voices rise from the square. Somewhere a peddler shouts about onions. Somewhere else a monk's bell drifts over the roofs like a reminder that time and flesh are both passing, whether one is shaved for it or not. Then the latch lifts again, and the next patient enters carrying not vanity this time but a small linen-wrapped bundle and the anxious face of a man who has waited too long to show it. The barber looks up, already reaching for cloth and bowl. The candlelight catches the leech jar at the edge of the table, and the creatures within turn slowly in their dark water, patient as winter. The man with the linen-wrapped bundle hesitates only a moment before stepping fully into the room, as though crossing the threshold commits him to whatever must come next. The barber gestures him toward the bench by the fire, and you notice the familiar pattern again: vanity near the window, discomfort near the hearth, and anything uncertain placed within easy reach of both warmth and water. The bundle is set carefully on the table. It is not large, but it carries weight in the way things do when they matter more than their size suggests. The man unwraps it with fingers that are not quite steady, revealing a forearm bound in cloth stained darker than morning prefers. He explains in a low voice that it was a cut from a tool no great thing. He insists, though the insistence itself suggests otherwise, and that it has grown angry overnight. Red, hot, stubborn. The sort of wound that refuses to remain small. The barber listens, then unwraps the binding with a patience that makes even the air seem to slow. The cut is not deep, but it has been neglected just enough to begin arguing with the body around it. The skin is swollen, the edges a little raised, the colour wrong in a way that medieval people would describe as ill-tempered, which is perhaps as accurate as any modern word. The barber does not frown, he does not sigh. He simply reaches for water, for wine, for clean cloth, and begins. Outside, the town has fully woken. You hear the rising hum of the market square now, voices layered over one another, merchants calling, coins clinking, geese objecting to commerce, and somewhere a child crying because something has been denied or dropped, or simply because crying feels correct at that moment. The barber's trade does not remain inside these walls. It moves outward, into that living noise. Market day, the barber mutters, more to himself than to you. He works quickly but not hurriedly, cleaning the wound with warm liquid and careful pressure. The man winces but holds still. There is a dignity to it, the quiet agreement between pain and necessity. When the cleaning is done, the barber applies a salve thicker this time, darker, smelling of honey, garlic, and crushed leaves that cling to the air like a memory of summer. Some swear garlic drives out corruption from wounds as it does from kitchens, though not all kitchens agree with that comparison. Others claim honey alone is a gift from heaven for keeping flesh from spoiling. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the remedy works because of its ingredients or because it is applied by hands that have learned, through long repetition, what not to do. The barber binds the arm again, firmer than before. "Keep it clean," he says, "and do not boast of strength by using it." The man nods, though you suspect he will test that advice within the hour. Medieval men are not known for resting when told. Once the bundle is wrapped again, though now it is less a secret and more a responsibility, the man pays and leaves, swallowed at once by the sounds of the square. The barber stands a moment, wiping his hands, then looks toward the door as though measuring the day's next demand. It does not keep him waiting. A boy bursts in, breathless, cheeks flushed from running, hair sticking out in all directions like a thatch roof after a storm. He carries no coin, no bundle, only urgency. "They want you in the square," he says, "near the well." A man fainted. The barber sighs not in annoyance but in recognition. The day has shifted again. He gathers what he needs with practiced speed. A cloth bundle tied with cord, a small jar. The leech container, after only a brief hesitation, is lifted and wrapped in another cloth to keep it from knocking against anything. He adds a strip of linen, a flask, and tucks a razor safely away. Then he pulls on his cloak, pauses to feed the fire once more, and nods toward the door. You follow. The lane outside feels brighter than it did before, though the sun remains shy behind a pale sky. The ground is still damp, still uneven, still determined to remind you that boots were invented for reasons no one ever questions twice. The dog joins you at once, trotting alongside as though officially appointed assistant to all outdoor barbering duties. The market square opens ahead like a living tapestry. Stalls are already set, cloths draped over rough tables, baskets of onions, turnips, and apples arranged in practical pyramids that will not survive the morning. Fish lie on boards, eyes dull but watchful. A man sells ribbons in colours that seem almost too bright for the rest of the world. Another hawks knives with a voice designed to cut through crowd noise and doubt alike. And there, near the well, a small gathering has formed. You approach with the barber, who does not push, does not shout. People see him and step aside, not out of fear, but out of habit. This is what he does. This is where he belongs. The man on the ground is not young. He lies on his back, cloak loosened, face pale in a way that speaks more of absence than illness. Someone has placed a folded cloth beneath his head, which is the sort of kindness that appears in crowds without instruction. A woman nearby fans him with the edge of her shawl, though the air is cold enough to make that effort seem more hopeful than effective. He just dropped. Someone says, one moment speaking, next moment gone. The barber kneels. He touches the man's wrist, his neck, his cheek. He speaks to him, low and steady, as though calling someone back from a distance only he can measure. The crowd quiets in that particular way people do when they want something to go well and know they cannot help it do so. The barber lifts the man's head slightly, checks his breathing, loosens the collar. He sprinkles a little water across the face. The man stirs, faintly at first, then more. A breath comes deeper. Another. The barber nods once, satisfied. Too little food, he says. Too much standing. It is not a diagnosis written in any great book, but it is one that fits the world before you. A cup is brought ale, thin and not entirely convincing as medicine, but useful all the same. The barber helps the man drink a little. Colour returns, not dramatically, but enough to persuade the crowd that the moment has passed. Some swear fainting comes when the body is startled by spirits, or by sudden imbalance of the humours. Others insist it is simply hunger dressed in mystery. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though most agree that bread and rest solve more problems than charms alone. The man is helped to sit, then to stand. He looks embarrassed, which is perhaps the surest sign he will recover. The barber rises, wipes his hands, and glances around the square as though expecting the day to present its next puzzle. It does. A young woman approaches, hesitant, holding out a hand wrapped in cloth. Not blood this time, but swelling, perhaps a sting. Perhaps something caught beneath the skin. The barber examines it quickly, presses here, there, then applies a small poultice from his bundle. Nearby, a child watches with enormous eyes, clutching a wooden toy so tightly it might be part of his hand. His mother whispers something about barbers knowing how to draw out trouble, which may or may not be literal. The barber says little. He works, ties, nods, moves on, and through it all, the market continues. A man argues over the price of cheese as though it were a matter of honour. A pilgrim with a badge pinned to his cloak moves slowly through the crowd, eyes lifted toward the church spire beyond the roofs. A woman laughs at something sharp and private. The smell of roasting meat drifts from a nearby stall, rich and tempting enough to make even the dog reconsider its loyalty to scraps. You begin to see the barber differently out here. In the shop, he is the centre. Here, he's part of a larger motion, moving between people, answering small needs before they grow larger, trimming a beard here, binding a hand there, offering advice that may or may not be followed. He is not grand, he is not revered, but he is necessary in a quiet, constant way. Somewhere behind you, a man has set up a stool and is having his beard trimmed in full view of the square. The barber works quickly, the act becoming almost theatrical steel flashing briefly in the light, cloth draped, head tilted, and passers-by glancing over with that mixture of curiosity and relief that comes from seeing someone else attend to their own maintenance. Public grooming has its own strange dignity. It says I belong here. I am part of this place. I care enough to be seen as cared for. The barber finishes, takes coin, wipes the blade, and moves on again. The rhythm continues, now louder, more scattered, but no less steady beneath the surface. By midday, the square will be thick with voices and trade, and the barber will have worked through a dozen small tasks that keep the town running just a little more smoothly than it would without him. You stand there a moment longer, watching him move through the crowd, his tools wrapped at his side, his presence as ordinary and as essential as bread, as bells, as the slow turning of a market day, and as the sun lifts just enough to pale the mist above the well, you realize something quietly important. The barber does not simply wait for need to come to him. He goes where it gathers. By the time the square settles into its fullest hum, the barber has already become part of the ordinary miracle of market day, that strange weekly moment when a town seems to swell beyond its walls with carts, cloaks, accents, grievances, and cabbages. The air smells of damp wool, horse sweat, onions, frying fat, and the cold mineral scent that rises from stone wells when the sun reaches them at last. Everywhere there is movement, merchants arranging bolts of cloth with offended precision, women turning over bundles of herbs, boys carrying baskets too large for their arms, pilgrims stepping carefully through the mud as though holiness might somehow protect their hems. The barber works near the edge of the square now, under the lean shadow of a timber arcade where a bench has been pulled beside a cooper's wall. It is not his own doorway, not his own hearth, and yet he arranges the little patch of space as if making a temporary kingdom out of cloth, bowl, and discipline. His tools are laid in order on a folded linen. The brass basin catches a pale slice of noon light. The wrapped bundle of salves and cloths rests at one side, ready for complaints that arrive wearing the shape of accidents. But for a little while the morning urgency thins. The man who fainted has gone home with watered ale in his belly and embarrassment in his step. The woman with the swollen hand has drifted back toward the herb sellers. The public beard trim is done, and now even the loudest merchants are momentarily distracted by actual trade. This is the midday lull, if such a thing can exist in a place where geese are screaming over root vegetables and someone is loudly insisting that his smoked eels are honest. The barber sits at last on the bench, shoulders easing by a fraction. He takes a heel of coarse bread from his satchel, breaks it cleanly, and eats without ceremony. You stand nearby, feeling the sun do almost nothing for the cold, and watch the square breathe around you. It is in this quieter pocket of time that the stranger parts of the trade begin to reveal themselves. A woman in a faded blue kirtle approaches carrying a small basket lined with cloth. At first you assume she means to sell him something, perhaps herbs or apples. But when she lifts the cloth, you see instead a little collection of objects that appear to have been gathered from several different versions of reality. A ribbon tied in 3 knots, a tiny saint's token, worn smooth at the edges, a packet of dried leaves bound with red thread, a chicken bone polished almost white, a curl of hair wrapped in linen so carefully that it might have belonged to a king or an infant, or, quite possibly, both at once if the town's gossip had any hand in it. The barber looks into the basket with the resigned expression of a man who has seen this before. The woman lowers her voice and asks whether he has anything for bad blood in the skin, because her husband's cousin's daughter has developed a rash that worsens on feast days and after storms and, according to one elderly aunt, whenever someone praises her too directly. This is presented as useful diagnostic information. The barber considers. He does not mock the saint's token. He does not toss aside the red thread packet. Instead, he picks up the dried leaves, sniffs them, then returns them to the basket with care. Rue, perhaps, or something pretending to be rue. He asks whether the rash itches, whether it is hot to the touch, whether the girl has had a fever, whether she's changed soap or wool. Practical questions first. Then, after a pause just long enough to preserve everyone's dignity, he says that a mild wash of warm water and herbs may help, and that the ribbon and token are welcome to remain if they make the household less foolish with worry. It is a masterful blending of worlds. Some swear the body listens better to remedies when it is reassured by signs and protections. Others say charms are for those who lack patience for boiling proper washes and changing dirty linens. Even now, it is hard to tell whether medieval belief separates medicine from superstition at all, or whether both simply share the same bench and learn to get along. The woman nods gratefully, as though he has confirmed not only a treatment but the continued sanity of her household. She buys a little packet of dried herbs from him, plantain, perhaps, or calendula, something golden and modest, and goes away looking steadier. The barber chews another piece of bread and watches her leave. Then an old man arrives with a wool cap pulled low and a leather thong around his neck from which hangs a tiny pouch. He does not ask for a trim. He asks whether the barber has any virtue against nosebleeds, because his grandson has had 3 in a month, and his daughter-in-law blames the east wind. while his own brother claims the boy has been looked at too admiringly by neighbours with weak souls and strong envy. The barber leans back against the wall and says, "Pinch the soft part. Keep him from picking it. Sit him upright." The old man nods, but you can see this is not nearly mystical enough to satisfy him. So the barber adds, after a beat, that little cold cloth at the neck may do no harm, and if the pouch the old man already carries contains yarrow, he may keep it on the boy if it pleases the household. The old man looks almost relieved. Practical advice and tolerated symbolism the recipe of the age. Those who tell the tale never fully agree how many medieval cures are meant for the body and how many are meant for the people hovering anxiously around the body. A tied thread may calm a grandmother faster than a poultice calms a bruise. A saint's image above the bed may help the patient chiefly by helping everyone else lower their voices and stop inventing fatal endings before supper. The barber finishes his bread and rinses it down with a swallow from a small flask. Then he turns to the leech jar, unwraps it, and sets it into the strip of sunlight falling across the bench. The creatures within stir with slow, unpromising life. A child nearby sees them and recoils in delighted horror. "Are they worms?" he asks. "Worse," says the barber. "Professionals." The child laughs, then goes immediately to tell 2 others, and within moments the barber has acquired an audience of 3 boys, a girl with a runny nose, and one suspicious dog who has decided the jar is probably edible only under extreme circumstances. Public curiosity is one of the barber's unpaid wages. He lifts the jar, lets the children peer through the glassy water, and explains nothing more than that they are useful when blood grows troublesome in places fingers cannot persuade. This sounds important enough to satisfy them and vague enough to preserve mystery. Some swear leeches work best when they come from certain ponds or monastery ditches, as though holy runoff improves appetite. Others insist the creatures must be kept from thunder, lest they sicken, or wrapped against moonlight, or fed carefully so they remain sweet, which is perhaps not the first word that rises naturally to mind. No one can quite agree whether the leeches themselves care about any of this. They float in their jar with the serenity of beings unconcerned by human theories. A woman selling ribbons passes by and crosses herself lightly at the sight of them. The barber does not comment. He is wise enough to let fear and usefulness coexist without argument. Medieval life depends on such truces. The lull deepens for a little while. Bells ring from the priory beyond the river, slow and measured. A pair of pilgrims sit on the well rim sharing coarse bread from a satchel. One of them has a pewter badge of a saint fixed to his cloak, rubbed bright by travel. Nearby, an herb woman is arguing with a poultry seller over the price of dried sage, which seems unfair to both the sage and the poultry but must mean something in context. The barber takes this chance to sort and inspect what he carries. He unfolds bandages, refolds them. He checks the neck of the salve jar. He wipes the shears. He tests the strop with 2 fingers. Then, from a smaller pouch inside the bundle, he draws several little wrapped items tied with thread. These are not exactly medicines, nor quite not medicines. One contains powdered charcoal and salt for cleaning teeth, or at least making people feel they are fighting decay with vigour. Another holds dried rosemary and bay leaves, sold as much for hanging near a bed as for boiling into a rinse. A third is made of ground herbs mixed with something bitter and resinous, useful perhaps in salves, perhaps in smoke, perhaps chiefly because it smells convincingly ancient. The barber handles them all with the same calm seriousness he gives his razor. You begin to see that the trade of a medieval barber is not simply about what he knows, it is also about what people expect him to know. He becomes the keeper of half-credible remedies, practical methods, inherited sayings, and objects that hover at the border between treatment and comfort. The villagers do not come wanting categories, they come wanting relief, and relief may wear many cloaks. A young mother brings over a little boy whose hair has begun to thin in a patch near the temple. She whispers, embarrassed, asking whether it is an ill humour, a skin thing, or perhaps the work of someone with a jealous eye. The barber studies the scalp, checks for nits, asks if the boy scratches, asks what they use when washing him. At last he says it may mend with time and cleanliness, and gives her a rinse of herbs to steep, while gently advising against rubbing goose grease on the patch because it helps the goose more than the child. That earns the smallest smile from her, which seems part of the remedy too. A tinker comes next, requesting something for sleeplessness. Not because he is ill, he insists, but because each night he hears creaking in the loft and is uncertain whether it is rats, old boards, or the soul of his first wife checking accounts. The barber recommends ale in moderation, warm feet, and less dramatizing of timber noises. Then, since the tinker clearly wants a touch more mystery than that, he also suggests hanging lavender near the bed if any can be had and saying a short prayer before lying down. Again the same balance body, mind, household peace. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the barber believes in half these things. Perhaps belief is too blunt a word. He lives among them. He knows which customs reassure, which charms comfort, which herbs genuinely soothe, which stories only keep people from washing. That alone makes him valuable. A breeze pushes through the square, carrying with it the smell of rain not yet arrived and the sharper scent of horse dung very much present. The barber looks up at the sky. Thin clouds are gathering beyond the roofs. Market days have their own weather, as if trade itself stirs the air into decision. The children have drifted away, disappointed that the leeches are neither exploding nor singing. The ribbon seller has finally made a sale. The pilgrims rise and shoulder their satchels, heading toward the church where some relic or rumour of a relic may be waiting. And through all of it the barber remains on his bench, a man between worlds, eating plain bread 1 hour and advising on red threads, rashes, scalp washes, envy, sleep, and blood the next. Then the lull breaks. A servant in better wool than most hurries across the square, threading between carts and baskets with the particular urgency of one carrying someone else's instructions. He spots the barber, lifts a hand, and calls his name over the noise. The barber is already standing before the message reaches him. The servant bows only slightly, enough to mark rank without over-committing to politeness, and says that he is wanted at the manor gatehouse. A lady steward requests his attendance. There is shaving to be done, perhaps treatment besides, and it is to be handled before the afternoon meal. The servant says this with the practised calm of someone trying not to mention too plainly that important people are involved, and therefore the mud must somehow behave accordingly. The barber nods once, begins wrapping his tools. Around him, the square carries on as though nothing has changed. Coins clink, a goose flaps, someone laughs too loudly, yet the day has tilted again, and now the razor that served market folk and worried grandmothers will be carried through a higher gate, into colder stone and stricter manners. The dog rises too, stretching in a long, untroubled curve before falling into step beside you both. Somewhere overhead, the clouds gather their patience. The road from the market square to the manor gatehouse is not long, though medieval distances have a talent for feeling greater once mud, rank, and expectation begin pulling at your boots. The servant leads at a brisk pace, careful not to appear hurried and failing just enough to make his urgency plain. The barber follows with his bundle tucked beneath one arm, cloak drawn close against the wind that has begun to move more sharply through the streets. You keep near him, while the dog trots behind with the stoic air of one who has attached himself to a profession and will now see where it leads. The town changes subtly as you go. Near the square, voices still crowd the air, mixed with the smell of frying onions, damp hay, and wet wool steaming at the shoulders. But as you pass up a narrower lane and toward the higher ground near the inner wall, the noise thins. Houses grow a little broader. Doors are better kept. Iron hinges appear less decorative by accident and more because someone actually paid a smith properly. A woman shakes a wool blanket from an upper window, sending a grey drift of lint into the cold. A pair of boys carrying kindling stop to stare at the barber's bundle, perhaps guessing what lies inside and perhaps hoping it is something more dramatic. Ahead rises the manor gatehouse, squat and watchful, built of worn stone darkened by long winters and damp seasons. Its archway is deep enough to swallow a cart and its complaints. Above it hangs a strip of faded banner that moves only reluctantly in the wind. 2 guards stand beneath the outer torch brackets, one stamping his feet for warmth, the other trying to look as though cold is a moral weakness rather than a fact. They know the servant, glance at the barber, then step aside with the mild indifference of men who have seen every kind of caller pass this threshold. Messengers, reeves, drovers, monks, lawyers, and now the fellow who shaves faces and occasionally opens veins. You pass beneath the arch and enter the gatehouse court. At once the air feels quieter, though no warmer. Horses shift in the stables to one side. A cart with a broken wheel leans near the wall, abandoned for the moment like a failed argument. Somewhere above, shutters bang once and are secured again. The courtyard stones are slick where water's been thrown and not entirely persuaded to leave. You smell straw, smoke, old rushes, and the faint sweetness of apples stored for winter somewhere beyond the main hall. The servant leads you not into the great house itself, but first into a side chamber near the gatehouse rooms, where those of lesser ceremony and greater practicality are dealt with. It is a long room with a low fire, a trestle table, a bench against the wall, and a narrow window that admits more grey light than comfort. Iron keys hang from a peg beside the door. A wool blanket has been folded over a chest. 2 beeswax candles burn despite the hour, because stone rooms are greedy and never seem to hold enough brightness on their own. The steward is waiting. He is lean, precise, and dressed in good dark wool that manages to look stern even while standing still. He greets the barber with the air of a man acknowledging the usefulness of a bucket necessary, respectable in its way. Not to be discussed at length. You recognize this type too. Great households run partly on bread and partly on people who disapprove of everything except efficiency. Our lord's nephew requires trimming, the steward says, and Sir Aldebrand has asked about the swelling in his arm again. The barber inclines his head. No surprise. No questions unless needed. He has likely come here before, perhaps many times. That is another part of his strange reach. A barber's razor carries him through levels of medieval society that rarely share benches or bowls. He may shave a carter at dawn, advise a market woman at noon, and by afternoon stand in a stone room waiting on the discomforts of minor nobility. No one can quite agree whether this gives a barber influence or simply better opportunities to be careful. A man who hears the complaints of both the square and the manor must learn early which truths are safe to carry and which are best left folded away like winter linen. The steward gestures toward a small side table. The barber sets down his bundle and begins laying out what he needs. Cloth first, basin next, shears, comb, razor, strop, then with only the faintest pause, the salve jar and a clean bandage roll. So there will be more than trimming. While he works, you take in the room. A rush mat lies by the fire, flattened by use. Smoke has darkened the stones above the hearth in an uneven crescent. On the table sits a small cup of warmed wine, half drunk and abandoned, and beside it a trencher with the crust of coarse bread left behind. Somewhere beyond the wall comes the muffled ring of metal from the smithy yard. The rhythm of the household continues all around you, hidden just out of sight, servants moving, doors opening. Someone crossing a gallery overhead, the faint bark of a dog better fed than the one at your feet. The first to enter is not the Lord's nephew, but Sir Aldebrand. He is older than the name prepares you for, broad-chested and greying, with one sleeve laced loosely at the forearm where it can be rolled back more easily. His expression suggests the sort of man who has survived by meeting discomfort with annoyance so persistent that discomfort often retreats out of sheer exhaustion. He greets the barber by name and lowers himself onto the bench with a grunt. The swelling worsens in damp weather, he says. Everything in this country worsens in damp weather, you think, including architecture and morale. The barber unties the sleeve and examines the arm, near the inside of the elbow, where an old injury or perhaps a troubled vein has begun complaining again. The flesh is puffed and warm, not grave, perhaps, but angry enough to concern a man used to command. The barber touches it gently, studies the colour, presses here and there while Sir Aldebrand watches with the stern patience of someone who trusts results more than explanations. The steward remains in the room, pretending to organise papers while listening to every word. The barber asks how long since it worsened, whether there has been fever, whether movement pains it, whether any salve has been used already. Sir Aldebrand answers shortly. A poultice from the kitchen herb woman, a strip of linen soaked in vinegar. One old aunt's suggestion involving hot onion and prayer, which he declines to discuss further. Some swear onions draw out swelling if laid warm enough and with sufficient conviction. Others insist vinegar corrects nearly everything short of sin. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though most remedies in a manner seem to begin either in the herb plot or the pantry and acquire dignity only after someone important uses them. The barber warms a cloth at the fire, then unwraps a small packet of herbs and mixes them into a paste with vinegar and something thicker from the salve jar. The scent rises sharp and earthy mustard, perhaps, or comfrey, with a bitter green note underneath. He applies the poultice in firm, even strokes, then binds the arm with a linen, not too tight, careful of the heat already gathered there. Keep the arm easy, he says. Sir Aldebrand snorts at the suggestion, which likely means he will ignore it immediately. Easy as for priests, he says. The barber makes no reply. Some advice is offered not because it will be obeyed, but because later everyone prefers to remember that it was given. As the bandage is secured, the young lord's nephew arrives. He cannot be more than 20, and perhaps not even that. He is fair-haired, fine-featured, and carrying himself with the polished unease of a young man trying to look entirely at home in rank he has not yet worn long enough to trust. He is accompanied by a page holding a folded mantle and a look of crushing boredom. The nephew greets the steward, nods to Sir Aldebrand, and takes the chair by the window with a kind of reluctant grace. The barber drapes the cloth around him. At once the entire mood of the room shifts from practical treatment to noble presentation. The nephew wants his beard trimmed close and his hair tidied at the neck before the meal. A simple enough request, and yet not simple at all. When a villager asks for neatness, he wishes to look respectable. When a noble youth asks, he wishes to look effortless, which is a far more complicated craft. The barber combs through his hair, studies the shape of jaw and cheek, and begins with the scissors. Snip, snip. Fine hair falls against dark cloth. The nephew watches his reflection in a polished hand mirror held by the page, though the metal shows less than he hopes. In this, noblemen are not so very different from ribbon stall boys in the square. Rank refines vanity. It does not cure it. The nephew asks whether the line at his cheek should be kept fuller, as in court, or nearer, as in town. The barber answers that the face decides more than fashion. It is a diplomatic masterpiece, revealing nothing and insulting no region. Sir Aldebrand gives a dry grunt that might be laughter. As the barber trims, you notice the subtle differences between this work and the morning's labours in town. The cloth is cleaner, the water is warmer, the chair, though still plain, has a cushion tied to it. Even the silence has better breeding, yet the trade itself remains the same. Comb, shears, check the line, tilt the head, wipe the blade. A barber's hands move with equal care whether the chin before him belongs to a mason, a merchant, or a young man who has likely never carried his own bucket of water 2 streets in winter. Even now, it's hard to tell whether that is the trade's humility or its hidden power. A servant girl enters quietly with fresh hot water and a folded towel. Her eyes drop at once from the young lord's nephew to the barber's tools. You see the calculation there. Every household notices the barber, not because he is grand, but because he touches the bodies of those others only serve around. He trims hair no maid would dare correct. He bandages arms no steward wishes to handle himself. He sees people in small moments of need, vanity, and vulnerability. This gives him a kind of access both ordinary and unusual. No one says it aloud, of course. Medieval households survive on what remains politely unspoken. The barber warms a cloth and lays it briefly against the nephew's jaw. Steam rises faintly. Then comes the razor. The page shifts position to catch the light better. The steward watches the window as if the courtyard has suddenly become fascinating. Sir Aldebrand, one arm newly bound, studies the process with the interest of a man relieved not to be the one under the blade. The shave is careful, elegant, almost ceremonial. The barber clears the cheeks, tidies beneath the chin, and shapes the short beard into something disciplined and youthful at once. Not severe, not soft. Suitable for a household meal where glances may matter and opinions are always seated nearby. Some swear noble blood grows finer hair, as though privilege reaches even the follicles. Others say noblemen simply pay to have it corrected before anyone notices. The second theory seems stronger. When it is finished, the nephew touches his face with discreet satisfaction. The page presents the mirror again. The steward finally allows himself a glance. Sir Aldebrand says, "You look like you've stopped losing arguments to your own collar, which is probably affectionate by family standards." The nephew almost smiles. A coin purse is brought. The steward pays. The barber accepts with a bow shallow enough to preserve his own dignity and deep enough to satisfy theirs. That balance, too, is part of the craft. In a manner, one must know not only how to sharpen steel, but how to sharpen one's manners to the correct edge. Before you leave, another request appears as they so often do once tools are visible. A kitchen servant has a blistered hand from a pot handle. A stable boy wants advice about a rash at the wrist where damp leather rubs. Someone asks whether rosemary water truly helps thinning hair. Someone else wonders if a small charm tied above the bed might quiet a child's night terrors. The barber answers each in turn, neither overreaching nor retreating. Salve for the blister, clean cloth for the rash. Rosemary may help the washing if not the hair. A charm may quiet the household if not the dreams. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether medieval medicine thrives because people believe too much or because they must believe something. Perhaps both. In cold stone places, certainty is as treasured as warmth. At last the barber gathers his thing again. The steward inclines his head, already turning back to household matters. Sir Aldebrand flexes his bandaged arm and looks unconvinced by moderation. The nephew departs to the meal smelling faintly of soap and looking as though he has inherited confidence along with his cleaned beard. Outside in the yard, the wind has picked up. The dog shakes itself and resumes its place at heel. As you step back beneath the gatehouse arch, you look once over your shoulder at the manor rooms at the oak doors, the hanging keys, the candles burning against the dimness, and you understand a little more clearly now how far the barber's profession extends. His razor carries him across thresholds most villagers pass only in imagination. Yet wherever he goes, the work remains stubbornly human: a sore arm, an overgrown neck, a blistered hand, a question half practical and half afraid. He serves the hall and the lane alike, and as the clouds gather thicker above the town, he heads next toward another kind of threshold entirely, one marked not by guards and gatehouse stone, but by bells. The road from the manor leads you downward again through the town and then out along a narrower lane where the noise of trade begins to loosen its grip on the air. Behind you, the market still mutters and clatters in its own busy language: coins, carts, livestock, arguments, promises, but ahead there is another rhythm waiting, slower and more measured, as if the day itself has drawn a longer breath. You hear the bells before you see the monastery. They come over the rooftops in even strokes, not hurried, not grand, simply certain. In a medieval world where so much is guessed, bargained, feared, or endured, bells have the comforting arrogance of things that believe entirely in their own purpose. They mark the hours whether anyone is ready or not. They call men to prayer, to labour, to meals, to sleep, to memory. They turn time into something heard, and on cold afternoons like this one, they also make the air feel larger. The barber walks with his bundle close under one arm, cloak pulled tight against the wind. The dog keeps pace beside him, though not without occasional pauses to inspect the edge of the roadside ditch for information of a deeply canine sort. Your boots take the mud as they must. A cart has passed this way not long before, leaving ruts thick enough to store rain, and the hedges at the lane's edge are leafless and black with winter damp. Beyond them lie fields under a pale wash of daylight. The furrows stiff and dark, the stubble silvered by old frost that never quite gave itself over to noon. Then the monastery appears. It rises low and broad beyond a stone wall, less like a castle than a collection of patient thoughts built into masonry. The church tower stands above the rest, simple and solid, and from the chimneys of the guest house and kitchens smoke drifts upward in straight pale ribbons. The gate is oak, iron-banded, weathered by long use, and beside it hangs a small carved image of a saint, so worn at the feet and hands that generations must have touched it entering and leaving. A pilgrim, perhaps, or a local protector of gates and hopes. In places like this, even wood can be polished by belief. A lay brother opens the wicket and recognizes the barber at once. So he's been here before too. That feels right. Monasteries need shaving as surely as towns do. Perhaps more so, because monks live by regularity, and regularity produces hair on schedule just as surely as it produces prayer. The brother nods, admits you all, and leads the way across a small outer court where the stones are cleaner than those at the manor but somehow colder. A stack of split wood leans beside the kitchen wall. A novice hurries past carrying a basket of onions and nearly collides with a cat who looks offended by every human vow ever taken. The silence here is not complete. It is layered. You hear crows above the roofline, the slap of laundry somewhere behind a wall, the creak of a pulley at the well, the distant murmur of chanting from the church, and the muffled clink of pottery from the kitchens. But none of it jostles. Everything seems to know its place, as though even noise has accepted a rule. The lay brother brings you through a side door into a warming room just off the cloister walk. At once the smell changes. Outside had been mud, wood smoke, winter air. Here there is beeswax, damp stone, wool drying by a fire, old parchment, and the faint medicinal green of herbs hung in bunches from a ceiling beam. On the wall stands a narrow shelf with jars and packets, and on a bench lies a folded wool blanket with a mend so careful it almost becomes decorative. The floor is strewn with rushes, fresh enough to smell sweet underfoot. A monk enters, inclining his head to the barber. He is not old, but the life has made him seem outside ordinary age, as if bells and routine file away certain years and leave others intact. His robe is plain, his hands ink-stained, and the crown of his head shows the growing roughness of a tonsure left too long between proper attention. That, you begin to understand, is one of the barber's chief reasons for coming. The tonsure. It is one of the stranger visible signs in medieval life, not because it is grotesque, far from it, but because it is so deliberate. The shaving of the crown marks the monk as set apart, devoted, ordered, claimed by a rule larger than himself. Hair, which in so many other places is coaxed, displayed, braided, trimmed, treasured, even feared, is here removed in a circle as an emblem of humility and vocation. The body is shaped into obedience, quite literally, by the barber's hand. No one can quite agree whether the form of the tonsure descends from apostolic tradition, practical custom, or ecclesiastical argument layered over older habit. Some defend one shape, some another. Some insist the ring should be broad, others neat and narrow. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, though monks in one region may judge the heads of another with the quiet intensity ordinary men reserve for border disputes. The monk takes the chair without drama. Clearly this is not his first time under the blade. The barber unwraps his tools and lays them out on the table beside the fire. Razor, cloth, bowl, comb. The same objects that touched merchants and minor nobles now take their place in a monastery warming room, and once again the trade crosses a threshold without changing its nature. The monk bows his head. The barber lays a cloth around his shoulders, dampens what hair remains around the ring, and begins to trim. There is a special tenderness to this work, though nothing soft or sentimental about it. The barber must clear the crown cleanly while preserving the ring of hair around it. He works with small, careful passes, turning the monk's head a little to the side, then forward, then back. Dark clippings fall onto the cloth and the rushes. The monk sits as still as carved wood, perhaps used to discipline, perhaps simply grateful that someone else will handle the back of his head for once. From somewhere beyond the door comes the faint sound of a reading voice in Latin, steady as rain on stone. You cannot make out the words. The barber likely cannot either, or not all of them. But the cadence fills the room like another kind of weather. When the trimming is done, the barber warms a cloth and wipes the crown, then takes up the razor. This part requires all the calm he's brought to every other face and forearm today, but the effect is different. To shave a jaw is to refine appearance. To shave a crown is to restore a sign. The razor whispers over the scalp. The monk's hands rest quietly on his knees. The dog, perhaps sensing that monastery decorum extends even to him, curls near the door and does not so much as sigh. Some swear a monk's tonsure should never be trimmed on certain feast days, lest vanity creep into obedience or work distract from devotion. Others say hair ignores feast days completely and must be handled before it turns piety untidy. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the rule or the razor has the final word. Likely the bell does. When the barber is finished, he wipes the crown again and rubs in the smallest touch of scented oil to soothe the skin against cold air. Rosemary, perhaps, or lavender so faint it scarcely announces itself. The monk thanks him in a voice low and worn by reading. You see relief in the set of his shoulders. Even holiness appreciates not having a patchy head. The lay brother brings in another. This one is older and narrower, his face lined by cold mornings and copied manuscripts. He smells faintly of vellum and smoke. Ink stains shadow the side of one finger and the edge of his nail. A scribe, clearly. He apologizes that he has delayed too long, but the copying room has been short of hands, and St. Jerome, he says, has not yet begun trimming crowns himself. The barber almost smiles. That is the kind of joke that flourishes in stone places where laughter must squeeze through smaller gaps. As the second tonsure begins, you glance around the warming room and notice more of the monastery's life folded into its corners. A basket of onions beneath a table, a pair of pattens drying near the hearth, a strip of cured fish hanging by the window, a wax tablet left on a bench with a stylus still pressed into its cord. From the herb bundles overhead you catch rue, sage, and perhaps mint. Monasteries are their own little worlds, and like all medieval worlds, they run on labour disguised as routine. Bells ring, prayers are said, manuscripts copied, gardens weeded, bread baked, floors swept, fish salted, cloaks mended, candles poured, and somewhere in the midst of it all someone remembers that half the brethren look like neglected sheep at the crown and sends for the barber. The old scribe clears his throat and asks, while the razor works, whether the barber has brought anything for cracked hands. Winter, ink, and frequent washing have left the skin at his knuckles split and raw. So there it is again, the trade widening beyond hair. The barber asks to see them after. He has a salve with goose fat, beeswax, and herbs, though not enough goose fat, he remarks dryly, to satisfy the popular imagination. When the tonsure is complete, he examines the scribe's hands and rubs in a little ointment. The old monk flexes his fingers with visible gratitude. Small relief, again. That is much of medieval care. Not miracles, not grand cures. Small relief offered at the right hour. Then comes a novice. He's barely more than a boy and sits in the chair with the expression of someone pretending very hard to be serene, while internally considering escape into the root cellar. His hair is still thick and soft with youth. The lay brother stands nearby, perhaps for reassurance, perhaps to ensure no one bolts halfway through sanctity. The barber, to his credit, is gentler with him than with the others, though no slower. The novice winces at the first cool touch of the cloth on his crown and then flushes, embarrassed by his own humanity. No one says anything. Medieval institutions are built almost entirely on collective agreement not to mention certain things. As the barber works, the bells sound again, nearer this time, and footsteps begin to move in the cloister outside. Sandals against stone, robes brushing the wall. The office is ending or beginning, you have lost track, which is exactly how monasteries prefer outsiders to feel. Time here belongs to devotion and gets measured accordingly. The novice, once shorn, looks younger and older at once. There is something startling about it. The tonsure does not merely change appearance. It reveals the shape of the head, the vulnerability of skin, the fact of the person beneath adornment. Some swear the crown left bare reminds a monk always of humility. Others whisper that it also makes him easier to identify should he try to run. The second theory is likely unjust, though not entirely unfunny. The lay brother returns with the small wooden bowl and offers the barber warm ale and a wedge of coarse bread with a little cheese. Payment here does not arrive in the same bright coin as the manner. Some of it comes in food, courtesy, access, perhaps future prayers, though prayers are notoriously difficult to count in a purse. The barber accepts with the same composed thanks he gives any household. He belongs everywhere and nowhere. A man called in for practical thresholds and then released again into the weather. A physician of herbs enters while the barber eats a monk from the infirmary, judging by the scent of dried plants that arrives with him. His robe sleeve bears a smudge of green, and his fingers are stained from pounding something useful in a mortar. He and the barber greet each other with the easy respect of men whose crafts overlap without entirely trusting the same authorities. They speak briefly of a lay brother with a sore leg, of which salves have been tried. Of whether warm washing has helped. Not argument exactly, but comparison. Experience meeting experience. Some swear monastery infirmaries preserve the best remedies because monks can read old texts and keep orderly gardens. Others say no library in Christendom can improve upon a village woman who has seen 50 winters of coughs, burns, and chilblains. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The truth, as usual, probably sits between herb bed and hearth. The monk from the infirmary also asks if the barber might look at Brother Martin's neck after the next bell, because there is a swelling behind the ear that has not decided whether to leave or declare itself permanent. So even here, beneath the discipline of hours and prayer, the barber's stranger role continues. Groomer, yes, but also pair of practical eyes, also steady hands, also someone who can be trusted not to faint at the ordinary betrayals of the flesh. You leave the warming room and follow him briefly along the cloister, where the covered walk echoes underfoot. The stone is worn smooth by centuries of sandals. The garth at the centre lies winter bare, a square of pale grass and damp earth with a simple well curb at one side. Through an open arch you glimpse the church interior dim beyond candles, and from somewhere high above comes the flutter of pigeons in the roof. Brother Martin's swelling proves to be troublesome rather than grave. The barber examines it near a window, recommends a warm cloth and a drawing poultice, and promises to send more herbs through the lay brother. Brother Martin nods as though bodily discomfort were a private failing. He must bear politely until corrected. At last the visit is done. The barber packs his tools again. The razors are wiped, the cloths folded, the little bits of hair shaken from the drape into the fire. The warming room resumes its monastery shape, as though the barber's presence were only a practical interruption in the great order of the day. Yet you know better now. He has moved through this place touching devotion at its most ordinary point, the scalp that must be shaved, the hands that crack in winter, the swelling behind an ear, the young novice trying not to flinch. The lay brother sees you out through the gate. Outside, the afternoon has turned colder, the light has thinned to pearl and iron. Smoke lies low above the fields. The bells sound behind you one last time as the gate closes, and you carry that sound back toward town with the scent of beeswax and herbs still clinging to your cloak. The dog trots ahead now, intent on home or supper or both, and as you follow the muddy lane once more, leaving silent halls and shaved crowns behind, you begin to understand that the barber's hand reaches even into places built for souls. Perhaps that is why the trade feels so strange. It concerns the body in a world forever talking about heaven. Soon enough, the body will make its louder demands again. Soon enough, as promised by the weather, the body begins making its louder demands again. You return with the barber toward the town just as the daylight starts to flatten into that pale, unforgiving afternoon brightness, which makes every stone look colder and every face a little more tired. The market is still going, though now it has lost the cheerful confidence of morning and taken on the worn persistence of people determined to finish their business before rain, darkness, or both come to spoil it. A cart laden with turnips creaks past like an old complaint. Somewhere a woman is bargaining over smoked fish with the grave intensity usually reserved for border treaties. The dog noses at a cabbage leaf in the gutter, rejects it as beneath professional standards, and carries on. The barber walks more quickly now. His visit to the monastery has not left him solemn. Exactly, but focused in a different way. Monks and nobles want order restored. Villagers, by late afternoon, often want something worse relief. A fresh shave may wait until tomorrow. A tooth that has begun hammering behind the eye has no such manners. Back at the shop, the room feels at once familiar and changed by your absence. The fire has sunk lower but still holds heat beneath the ash. The beeswax candles have burned down another finger's width. The half-burned stub on its peg has finally been lit and now throws an unsteady little circle of gold toward the basin. The rushes on the floor smell faintly of damp boots again. Someone, perhaps a helpful neighbour. Perhaps no one at all, and merely the habits of the place has left a small loaf wrapped in cloth on the table. Medieval generosity rarely announces itself, which is probably why it survives. The barber sets down his bundle, feeds the fire, and has only just begun to lay out fresh cloth when the first of the evening's truly uncomfortable visitors arrives. He is a cooper, broad-handed and red-eyed, with one cheek swollen enough to give him the look of a man storing walnuts for winter. His jaw is tied up in a strip of linen, the knot sitting crookedly above one ear. Every movement he makes seems to pulse with resentment. He removes the linen, mutters something about the devil in the back molar, and sits on the bench without being asked, because pain has already chosen the furniture for him. The barber takes one look and reaches not for the razor but for the smaller tools. So this is the hour of brave faces. The cooper opens his mouth with obvious reluctance. The barber peers in, candle lifted near but not too near, fingers gentle and certain as he turns the jaw slightly toward the light. You catch a glimpse of the tooth in question at the back, dark at the gum and wickedly lodged as though it has decided to become a local tyrant. The cooper jerks away, swears in a tone mild enough for the age but heartfelt enough for eternity, and presses his knuckles to his temple. 3 nights, he says. That explains the eyes. The barber asks the usual things in his usual low way. Fever, swelling of the neck. Trouble swallowing. Has he tried clove? Salt rinse, hot cloth, prayer, garlic, or all the other medieval attempts to negotiate with a bad tooth before escalating to steel? The cooper nods grimly through several of these. Salt, yes. Vinegar, yes. A charm from his sister-in-law involving a scrap of psalm tied in blue thread, yes. Warm ale held against the cheek, yes. Though he confesses that more of the ale went inward than outward, which seems only sensible. Some swear a toothache can be caused by a worm boring invisibly within the tooth itself. A tiny creature driven mad by cold air or sweet food or divine disapproval. Others say it is trapped corruption, or bad humours rising, or simply the body's way of reminding you that joy is temporary. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but all are united on one point once a tooth begins truly to revolt. Philosophy becomes secondary. The barber warms a cloth and presses it briefly to the cheek, perhaps to soothe, perhaps to buy the cooper one last moment of hope. Then he opens the iron-bound chest and takes out the tooth drawer. It is not ornate. It does not need to be. It is plain iron, stout and honest in the same way winter is honest. You look at it and immediately understand why people pray before this part of the trade. The cooper sees it too and goes very still. The barber says only, "Hold firm." A strip of leather is offered to bite. The cooper takes it with the gratitude of a man accepting dignity's final available form. The barber braces the jaw, settles the tool, adjusts once, and then cleanly, decisively, without flourish, does what must be done. The cooper makes a sound that begins in the boots and ends somewhere in the rafters. The dog bolts upright in professional alarm. The candle trembles. Then it is over. Almost over. The barber presses a folded cloth to the gum and tells him to hold it hard. The cooper bends forward, breathing through his nose, one hand gripping the bench as though he intends to pull it into the next century. In the barber's fingers lies the tooth, ugly and complete, a tiny piece of rebellion just ended. He drops it into a dish with a soft click that seems far too small for the trouble it has caused. Even now, it's hard to tell whether the greater skill lies in extracting the tooth, or in doing so with enough calm that the rest of the room does not flee into the street. The cooper stays bent a while, then straightens little by little, eyes wet, face slack with the first astonished easing of pain after long misery. Relief arrives like thaw water slowly, then all at once. He spits, presses the cloth again, and gives the barber a look made of gratitude, exhaustion, and slight betrayal. "You might have warned me," he mutters. "I did," says the barber. It is impossible not to admire the economy of that answer. The cooper leaves eventually, clutching his jaw and his extracted enemy wrapped in cloth. Some people keep such teeth, oddly enough. Some bury them. Some throw them into the fire, believing this prevents worse pain later or keeps witches, birds, or mischief makers from making use of them. No one can quite agree what malevolent advantage could be gained from a rotten molar, but medieval people are wisely cautious about discarding parts of themselves without ceremony. The chair has scarcely cooled before the next case arrives. This one is a boy of perhaps 14, all elbows and embarrassment, brought in by his mother with one hand clamped over the heel of his palm. He has driven a splinter into it while unloading rough timber, and not a small one either. His mother is already apologizing for the inconvenience, which is what mothers do when pain belongs to someone smaller, and male pride is trying very hard to outgrow itself. The barber sits him near the fire and unwinds the cloth. The splinter lies buried under the skin at the base of the thumb, a dark line beneath reddened flesh. Not dramatic, not noble, but the sort of trouble that can fester if ignored. And festered things have a particular genius for becoming larger than their beginnings. The barber heats water, washes the hand, then reaches for the tweezers. The boy watches with the expression of someone trying to look older than the pain allows. "Keep still," says the barber, a command easier spoken than obeyed. The tweezers go in with maddening patience, lifting skin just enough, teasing at the buried sliver, drawing it toward the light. The boy hisses, his mother crosses herself. The dog looks offended on behalf of youth in general, and at last the splinter comes free longer than expected, thin as a thorn, glistening with the importance of anything that has occupied the body rent-free. The barber holds it up. The mother makes an impressed noise. The boy pretends not to care, which is how you know he does. The barber cleans the little wound, rubs in salve, wraps the hand, and tells him not to plunge it back into muck before tomorrow. The boy nods at once, which means he will likely be doing exactly that within the hour. Medieval life is not designed for convalescence among the young and useful. As they leave, an older woman enters, bundled in a brown cloak that smells of rain and wood smoke. One eye waters constantly, and she keeps blinking at the room as though the air itself has become sharp. She says there is something in it, and has been for 2 days. Dust, perhaps, chaff, a tiny lash-turned traitor. The barber seats her by the candle and peers carefully, lifting the lid with surprising gentleness. Here again the trade becomes alarmingly practical. A little thing, invisible almost, can make the whole world unbearable. The barber wets a clean cloth, twists it fine, and with the skill of long annoyance removes what turns out to be a grain husk tucked beneath the lid. The woman gasps, blinks furiously, and then laughs from sheer relief. "Bless you," she says. The barber, who has spent the day among charms, monks, servants, blood, hair, and tooth iron, accepts the blessing as one more item in the ordinary commerce of the world. The small cases keep coming. A drover with a boil near the neck that wants lancing, but not, at first, courage. A child with a thorn buried in the heel. A weaver whose finger has swollen around a cracked nail. None are grand enough for university medicine or lordly attention. All are exactly the sort of suffering that makes life heavier by ounces until someone with steady hands agrees to notice. Some swear boils come from overheated blood, others from bad sleep, bad food, bad luck, or sitting too near damp walls. In truth, medieval explanations often travel in packs. The barber seems happy to let causes remain crowded so long as the remedy is clear enough. Warm cloth, clean cut, drawing salve, rest when possible, less fiddling with the problem by anxious relatives, though this part is rarely said out loud. By now the room has taken on that late-day intimacy only working places acquire. Firelight deepens, shadows lengthen behind the basin and along the black rafters. The smell of herbs has thickened under the sharper notes of iron and hot water. Outside, the market is beginning to thin. Voices pass in smaller bursts, and now and then the priory bells roll over the roofs as if reminding the town that daylight is slipping away, whether anyone has finished bargaining or not. Then comes the most nervous visitor of all, a young man with the swelling at the side of the jaw, just below the ear, which has turned the whole side of his face tender and stiff. He sits with his hat crushed in both hands and asks, very quietly, whether the barber thinks it should be opened. The barber examines the lump, presses lightly, waits for the reaction, and then nods once. Yes, he says. That single syllable weighs as much as armour. The young man goes pale, but he stays. A cloth is warmed, a small lancet is set out. The barber explains almost nothing, not because he is cruel, but because explanation is no use now. The swelling is ready, the room is ready, the young man is as ready as fear allows. The barber opens it neatly, efficiently, with none of the hesitation that would only make the body distrust him more. The relief is not immediate, not dramatic, but it begins at once. Pressure lessens, the jaw loosens, the young man breathes differently. That may be the strangest thing of all about barbering here. The work is often unpleasant to watch, and yet beneath it lies mercy of a very practical sort. Not beautiful mercy, not poetic mercy, cloth and iron mercy, tweezers and firelight mercy, the kind that removes, drains, binds, wipes, and sends people back into the cold with less pain than they brought in. Those who tell the tale never fully agree where a barber belongs in the grand order of things beneath the physician. above the quack beside the apothecary, somewhere between craftsman and healer, somewhere between necessary and alarming. But by late afternoon, after the tooth, the splinter, the eye, the boil, and the swelling, you begin to suspect such categories matter less than anyone thinks. People come because he helps. When at last the door closes on the final patient of that long practical stretch, the barber stands in the little room with his sleeves rolled and his hands in warm water gone pink, then cloudy, then clean again. The dog settles back onto the rushes, the candle gutters, recovers. Outside, a cart rattles toward the gate, late to leave. Somewhere close by a woman is singing under her breath while folding linen. The town is moving toward evening. The barber dries his hands, rubs the base of his thumb where the tooth drawer pressed hard, and reaches at last for the loaf left on the table. The hour for alehouse talk is drawing near. By the time the barber breaks the loaf and eats a little of it standing up, the light outside has thinned into that smoky blue hour when a medieval town begins to fold itself inward. Stalls in the market square are being stripped back to boards and baskets. Carts groan toward gates before full dark. The cold comes off the stones with renewed confidence, and every doorway begins to look less like architecture and more like a promise. The priory bell sounds again across the roofs, lower now in the evening air, and the note seems to settle in the half-burned candle, the brass basin, the damp rushes, and the barber's tired shoulders alike. He does not return to work at once. Instead, after wiping the table, banking the fire enough that it will not die entirely, and setting the sharper tools safely back into the iron-bound chest, he pulls on his cloak and lifts a smaller satchel. Not the full working bundle this time, only what might be prudent to carry in a town where supper, drink, and minor emergencies have a well-known habit of discovering one another. The dog is already up, tail giving one sober sweep against the floor. There are professions, clearly, that include an evening round by instinct. You follow the barber into the lane. The air bites sharper than before, and a fine mist is beginning to rise from the river beyond the wall. Smoke drifts low from chimneys, bringing with it the smell of peat, damp wood, roasting onions, and the richer promise of stew from houses luckier than yours. Windows glow behind horn panes and open shutters. Somewhere a child is being called inside with a tone usually reserved for livestock and sinners. Somewhere else a smith closes his day with 3 final strikes, each one echoing in the cold like a punctuation mark. The alehouse stands near the square, though slightly aside from it, as if acknowledging trade without entirely trusting it. It is a broad, low building with a hanging sign darkened by soot and weather, and above the door a lantern already burns, turning the rising damp gold for a few feet, and then giving up. You hear the place before you enter cups meeting wood, boots on boards, a burst of laughter, then the thick woven murmur of many voices coexisting without any genuine intention of listening to one another. Inside, warmth comes at you all at once. It smells of ale, spilled and fresh, of wet wool steaming dry, of rushes, of smoke trapped permanently in the beams, of onions and pottage, and somewhere beneath it all the faint animal note of people who have worked long and honestly enough not to care very much. The common room is lit by candles and firelight, which means half the faces are gold and half a shadow. Benches crowd the floor. A great hearth blazes at one end with a pot suspended over it, and along the wall sit men and women with cups in hand, cloaks steaming, shoulders loose at last. The barbers noticed at once. Not celebrated, not announced, but noticed in that quiet way certain useful people always are. Heads turn, a hand lifts. Someone calls for him to join a table near the fire. Someone else asks, before he's even shrugged the cold from his cloak, whether he still has anything for chilblains, because my toes feel like saints' relics, distant and not especially cooperative. The barber says that if the toes become holy enough to work miracles, he will reconsider the case. A few laugh. The tension of the day gives way by a notch. You take a place near him on a bench polished by generations of damp breeches. The dog curls beneath the table with the prompt expertise of an old soldier. Ella is brought in a ceramic mug, dark and thin, the sort of drink that nourishes partly by warmth and partly by morale. The barber drinks slowly. He is not off duty, you realise. He is simply on a different kind of duty now. Around him sit the whole woven fabric of the town, a cooper with one side of the jaw held slightly tenderly. Yes, the same one, looking vastly improved and determined to retell the extraction, as if he personally fought the tooth in single combat. A baker's cousin with flour still in one cuff. A carter whose hands are split at the knuckles from cold rope. A widow who sells onions in the square and misses nothing worth hearing. And a man from the gate watch who smells faintly of leather, rain, an importance least by the hour. This is the barber in his third aspect. In the morning he had been craftsman. In the afternoon, healer of inconveniences too sharp to ignore. Here in the alehouse, by eventide, he becomes listener, interpreter, the keeper of town weather in its human form. People speak differently over cups than they do under a razor. Their jaws loosen, their caution softens, their opinions multiply. The cooper, already 2 drinks into gratitude, puts a hand to his cheek and declares that the pain is nearly gone, though he says it in the tone of a man hoping praise will somehow retroactively reduce what he endured. The gate watchman asks whether he kept the tooth. The cooper says yes, wrapped in linen, because his mother always swore a pulled tooth should be burned before moonrise, or the ache would find its way back through the gums. The widow on the bench sniffs and says the tooth should be thrown onto the roof instead, so that magpies take the bad luck off with it. No one can quite agree what should be done with an extracted tooth, which is comforting in its own way. Every age has its administrative confusion. Some swear burning it keeps pain from returning. Some swear burying it beneath the threshold is safer, lest dogs get hold of it and leave your neck's teeth crooked by sympathy. Others insist that if a child's tooth is hidden in a wall crack, the new one grows strong. The barber lets all of this pass over him like weather over stone. He only says, "Do whichever keeps you from bringing it back in a pouch next week." The cooper looks slightly disappointed at having his ritual ambition simplified. A woman from the next table leans over to ask whether goose grease truly helps cracked lips. The barber answers that it helps some things and worsens others, and in this room it would mostly help the geese become insufferable with pride. That gets another low ripple of laughter. The joke is dry enough not to wake anyone, which is ideal. This is an alehouse at dusk, not a tournament. As the evening deepens, the stories begin doing what evening stories always do, drifting toward that uncertain border where memory, gossip, and legend drink from the same cup. A drover swears he once met a travelling barber on the northern road who carried not only razors and lancets, but a little silver reliquary tied to his belt, and that before opening a boil, he would tap the reliquary twice and murmur a saint's name into his sleeve. The widow says she has heard of such men, though she suspects the reliquary was brass and the saint invented after supper. The gate watchman says no respectable barber would trust his livelihood to a relic that might be stolen by the first pilgrim with nimble fingers. The barber himself only drinks, and says that steel sharpened properly requires very little help from heaven, though he does not refuse heaven if it happens to be nearby. Those who tell the tale never fully agree where a barber's authority comes from. Some say from apprenticeship and hand skill, some from nerve, some from being willing to touch the parts of life other people prefer to discuss in general terms, and some, especially after a second cup, say it comes from knowing 3 useful herbs, 5 convincing phrases, and exactly when to keep quiet. That last one may be the most accurate. You begin to notice how often people lean in toward him, not for remedies but for judgment. Not moral judgment. This is not a priest's bench, but practical judgment. A woman asks whether her son's cough sounds chest-deep or merely stubborn. A man asks if a swelling at the wrist means bad blood or bad work gloves. Another wants to know whether cutting hair by candlelight brings misfortune, because his sister insists it does, and has now refused to trim her husband until dawn. The barber answers each with the same measured calm. Chest deep if there is fever. Wrist swelling if it reddens. Rest it. Hair by candlelight is no more cursed than hair by sunrise, though worse lit and therefore more likely to produce regret. The room approves of this mixture of realism and courtesy. At one point, the onion widow mentions a suspicious monk seen in the market earlier, buying more honey than any reasonable soul could need. The watchman says monks are never suspicious until they're quiet about it. The cooper says monks buy honey because their bread is grim. The barber says monks buy honey because everyone buys honey when winter begins to argue with the bones. Again, everyone nods. It is surprisingly difficult to be dramatic in the face of practical truth. A serving girl brings trenchers of pottage thick with barley and onions. Coarse bread follows, then smoked fish on a wooden board, and a little dish of salt passed carefully because salt still has the power to make ordinary food feel briefly important. The barber eats slowly, neither the hungriest man at the table nor the least tired. Firelight moves over his face, showing the fatigue there now at the edges, the long day in the hands, the shoulders, the set of the mouth, and yet he listens. Always that. He hears the square settling, the gate watch rotating, the small injuries of winter beginning their season, the rumours of feasts and fines and travellers and chilblains and swollen gums. He is, you realise, one of the few people in town who moves through nearly every level of it without being fully absorbed by any. He sees merchants neat for market, servants tidied for dinner, monks restored to rule, nobles trimmed into confidence, and labourers brought back from the brink of being unable to work. Then he sits among them all in the alehouse, receiving the softer, stranger cargo of the evening worry, rumour, relief, and half-believed lore. Even now it's hard to tell whether the barber is more healer or more witness. Perhaps the answer is simply yes. A man at the far end of the table begins telling a story about a barber surgeon in another town who once set a broken nose so straight that the patient married above his station within the year. Someone else counters with a tale of a barber who tried bloodletting on a goose to test a theory and was chased across a yard by the bird's outraged widow. The truth of either story is doubtful. The pleasure of them is not. Eventide encourages exaggeration the way frost encourages excuses. The barber contributes nothing to these tales beyond one raised brow at the goose widow story, which is probably the correct amount. The dog, beneath the table, receives a piece of crust from the cooper and accepts it with the solemn gratitude of one who knows the evening has entered its decent phase. Outside, rain begins at last not hard, only a soft tapping first against the shutterboards and then a steadier hush along the lane. The room responds as medieval rooms always do to weather bodies settle deeper. Cups are refilled more thoughtfully, cloaks edge closer to the fire, and anyone who had been considering leaving decides that, in fact, destiny can wait another quarter hour. That is when the gate watchman says, almost casually, that someone up near the outer road has taken ill in a cottage beyond the tanner's sheds. Not gravely, perhaps, but enough that a boy was sent asking whether the barber was still about. The message came late, delayed by rain and supper and the usual habits of human urgency. The barber sets down his cup. Not with drama, not with reluctance either, only with the small acceptance of a man whose trade does not end neatly when the candles are lit. The widow clicks her tongue and says, "People always wait till evening to become inconvenient." The cooper mutters that bodies should show more respect for alehouse hours. The barber says nothing. He only wipes his hands on the cloth at his belt, rises, and reaches for the smaller satchel he had hung on the bench post beside him. There is a little collective shifting at the table then, the quiet recognition that the evening's comfortable circle is about to loosen. Someone offers him a bit of waxed linen. Someone else says the road will be slick near the ditch. The serving girl thrusts a stub of candle and a strip of rushlight into his hand as if provision itself were a form of blessing. Some swear sickness worsens after sunset because darkness gives fear more room. Others say people notice pain more when work is done and silence enters the house. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. But everyone in the alehouse knows one thing for certain if someone has sent for the barber after rainfall and night bells. The matter is no longer vanity. The barber pulls up his hood. The dog unfolds itself from beneath the bench as though summoned by a horn only it can hear. Outside, the rain has settled into a fine, persistent curtain over the town, and so the warm room, the pottage, the cups, the dry jokes, the gossiping comfort of eventide, all of it falls behind as you step once more into the dark, carrying a little light, a few tools, and the old medieval understanding that need does not care what hour it is. Outside the alehouse, the rain feels finer than it sounded from within, but colder too, as if the dark itself has been steeped in river water and laid across the town. The lane shines in patches where lantern light catches it, and everywhere else it is only mud, shadow, and the uncertain suggestion of wheels that have passed before you. Behind. The alehouse door closes on warmth and voices and the smell of pottage. Ahead lies the outer road, the tanner's sheds, and a cottage where someone has decided, as people so often do, that trouble is best addressed after sunset when every puddle becomes philosophical. The barber lowers his head into the rain and walks. His smaller satchel bumps lightly against his hip. In it you hear the muted little knocks of practical things: cloth, salve, a bandage roll, perhaps a razor, a lancet, a pot of herbs wrapped against damp. Not the full day's array, only enough to answer whatever shape of misery waits beyond the town's warmer heart. The dog keeps close at heel, already dark with rain along the back, though not remotely discouraged. Some creatures are made for hearths. Others are made for accompanying men who are never fully off duty. You pass beneath the last hanging lantern near the square and move into the poorer edge of town, where the house is thin. The boards lean more decisively into one another, and the smell changes again. Smoke still drifts from chimneys. Yes, and wet wool still dominates every medieval evening worth the name. But now there is also the sour, unmistakable reek of tanning pits farther up the road, oak bark, urine, wet hide, and the kind of labour that never expects applause. Even by the standards of the age, tanners live in a fragrance all their own. Medieval real estate, like medieval theology, is built firmly on hierarchy. The outer road is little more than a churned track between ditches, and the rain has given every rut a silver skin. You hear frogs somewhere in the deeper water, though you cannot imagine they are enjoying themselves either. Farther off, beyond the sheds, the last of the gate traffic rattles out into the dark, a cart late to leave. a mule objecting, a man swearing softly at a wheel. Then the sound fades, and what remains is the steady whisper of rain on thatch, rain on puddles, rain on cloaks, rain on... A rushlight burns in the barber's hand now, protected awkwardly by the curve of his fingers. It throws a narrow, wavering yellow ahead of you, enough to show the ditch edge, the dark shape of stacked hides, the low humped roofs of work sheds, and the final turn toward a cluster of cottages crouched near the boundary, where town becomes open road and open road becomes trouble. One of the cottages shows a light. Not much of one, just a small, uncertain glow behind a horn pane and a line of warmer gold at the bottom of the door. But in weather like this, at this hour, it feels as deliberate as a beacon. The barber knocks once and enters without ceremony when the latch lifts. Inside, the room is cramped, warm, and anxious. A low fire struggles in the hearth. Damp cloaks hang from pegs near the door, adding their own weather to the air. The smoke does not entirely know where the chimney is, and so it lingers in the rafters, where it joins the smell of onion broth, wet straw, sour ale, and that faint human fever scent which, once noticed, can never quite be mistaken for anything else. Rushes are strewn over the floor, though flattened thin by long use. A stool sits overturned near the wall, likely kicked aside in haste. On a bench under a wool blanket lies the patient. He is a carter, judging by the shoulders and the hands. Big hands, cracked and blackened in the creases from rope, axle grease, and work that begins before better men open their eyes. His face glistens with sweat despite the cold night. One leg is stretched stiff beneath the blanket, and the woman beside him, wife, sister, or neighbour, it hardly matters which just now looks up at the barber with the exhausted intensity of someone who's already tried worrying and would now prefer results. He took a fall unloading, she says, then the leg swelled. He said it was nothing. Then by dusk he was shaking. There are few more medieval sentences than that. It was nothing until it was not. The barber sets down his satchel, moves closer, and peels back the blanket. The leg, from shin to knee, is wrapped in coarse linen already darkened in places. He unwinds it carefully. Beneath, the skin is swollen and angry around a jagged scrape along the shin where wood or iron must have torn it. The wound itself is not enormous, but it has been left long enough in mud and labour to sour. Heat radiates from it. The man winces even half asleep. The barber does not waste any movement. Water is called for. The woman brings a small pot from the hearth. Another cloth is found clean by the standards of emergency and weather, which is to say acceptable if no one asks delicate questions. The barber asks whether there has been fever. Yes. Whether the shaking began before full dark. Yes. Whether the man has eaten. Barely. Whether anyone has put anything on the wound. Here the answers become more medieval. Comfrey leaves. Someone says, goose fat, a pinch of salt. One old neighbour advised laying a spider web over it to draw the badness out. Though this, from the look on the woman's face, was not adopted. Another suggested saying St. Roch's name 3 times while binding it, which may or may not have been done, depending on how strictly one counts panic prayers. Some swear spiderwebs stop bleeding and help wounds knit. Others say they only help spiders feel useful. Even now, it is hard to tell which remedies are inherited wisdom and which are the result of one extraordinary recovery 3 generations ago that no one has ever quite stopped mentioning. The barber washes the scrape carefully, thoroughly, with the patience of a man who knows that clean pain is preferable to dirty pain with ambitions. The carter jerks awake with a curse so dulled by weakness it lands more like complaint. The barber tells him to hold still. The woman holds his shoulders. The dog lies down by the door as if to anchor the room morally if not medically. When the wound is clean, the barber examines the leg more fully, feeling along the shin and knee for signs of a break. Here, there is none or none obvious. Bruised badly, swollen, perhaps strained, but not snapped. That is mercy enough for one night. He mixes a poultice from what he has brought, adding something from the household shelf when he sees it there, a jar of honey, tightly covered and clearly guarded from children and theft alike. Honey again, faithful servant of the age. Into it goes crushed herb from his packet, perhaps plantain, perhaps yarrow, perhaps something bitter from the monastery infirmary by way of long acquaintance. No one can quite agree why honey appears in so many medieval remedies, though everyone agrees it is too precious to waste unless the need is real. Sweetness, after all, is one of the few luxuries that can also pretend to be medicine and get away with it. He spreads the mixture over clean linen and binds the leg again, not tightly, but firmly enough to reassure the flesh that somebody competent has arrived. Then he has the woman bring more watered ale, and this time the man drinks. Not much. Enough. Rain ticks against the wall. A chicken under the bench gives one deeply offended rustle, and settles again. Somewhere in the cottage a child coughs in sleep from behind a hanging cloth partition. The whole room seems to lean inward around the barber's work, as though the household itself has paused to see what the night will become. He asks about the shaking. The woman says he was cold first, then hot, then cold again. The barber feels the carter's forehead, then his wrist, and sits back on his heels for a moment. He is measuring something not with numbers, not with written doctrine, but with the lived accumulation of every other body he has seen turn toward fever in poor rooms after long days. This is another part of the trade rarely praised. A barber learns patterns, who looks merely miserable, who looks quietly dangerous, who can wait till dawn, who must be coaxed through the next few hours first. He tells them to keep the man warm but not smothered, to give water and ale in small amounts, to watch for worsening heat, for greater confusion, for the leg becoming harder, redder, more swollen by morning. He will return if sent for. The woman nods fiercely, committing each word to memory like prayer. In times like these, instructions themselves can feel like a kind of shelter. Then, inevitably, another problem appears. A little girl, no more than 7, emerges from behind the hanging cloth, rubbing one eye and clutching a rag doll by one leg. She's been awakened by the voices and now stands barefoot on the rushes in a night shift too thin for the season. The woman scoops her up at once and tucks the blanket round her, but not before the barber notices the child's wrist wrapped in a strip of faded red thread. A charm. The girl, now safer in her mother's lap, peers at the barber with huge solemn eyes and asks if he is the man who takes out teeth. In extreme diplomacy, he says, it is not quite a joke for her, but it soothes the room by a fraction. The mother strokes the girl's hair and explains in a low voice that the thread was tied on last week by an aunt for the winter ague, because the child had been sleeping fitfully and waking with bad dreams. The barber only nods. He does not challenge the red thread. It is doing no harm, and perhaps less harm than many things people say around frightened children. Some swear red protects against fever, envy, wandering spirits, and bad luck if tied on the correct day. Others insist it protects chiefly against the feelings of relatives who would otherwise insist on doing something worse. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but no one in this room tonight wants a debate. They want the man on the bench breathing easier and the child asleep again before fear grows large. The barber asks whether the girl has been well otherwise. The mother says yes, apart from a cough here and there. He nods once more, then reaches into his satchel and draws out a tiny pinch of dried lavender and rosemary tied in cloth. He hands it to the girl and tells her it may sit near the bed to please the night air and discourage troublesome dreams. The mother looks relieved. The girl looks awed. A small gift, almost nothing. But now the household has been treated as a whole, not only its worst wound. That, perhaps, is the quiet genius of these late calls. Illness at night never belongs to one body alone. It fills the room. It changes how everyone breathes. The barber stays a while longer, long enough for the fevered Carter to settle into something less ragged than before, long enough for the woman to believe dawn is at least still possible. He drinks a little of the broth pressed upon him and refuses the better portion with the tact of one who knows a poor house cannot spare generosity, but must still be allowed to offer it. He checks the bandage once more. Satisfied for now, he stands. The woman asks what is owed. He names something small. Too small, perhaps, but this too is part of the trade. In cottages like this one, coin does not always exist in the tidy form one imagines. Payment may come later in eggs, in cord, in bread, in some future kindness when his own roof leaks or his dog wanders or he needs word carried after rain. Medieval economies survive on such sideways fairness. At the door, the woman presses on him a little wrapped parcel anyway, coarse bread and half an onion, humble and sincere. He accepts because refusing would wound more than charge. Again, practical mercy moving in both directions. Outside, the rain has softened to mist. The barber pulls up his hood again and steps back into the dark lane. Behind him the cottage glows dimly, smaller now but steadier. The dog shakes once, thoroughly, decorating your boots with droplets of loyalty. The rushlight is nearly spent, so the road back must be taken by memory, by puddle, by the pale suggestion of the sky behind clouds, and by the kind of town knowledge no map ever captures. You walk past the tanner's sheds again, past the ditch with its cold black water, past stacked hides and shuttered workrooms. The town seems half asleep now, though not fully. A baby cries somewhere behind an oak door. A couple quarrels in low fierce whispers. A horse stamps in a stable. One late lantern still burns near the gatehouse wall, haloed in fog. The priory bell sounds the hour, and the note travels through the mist like a hand laid briefly on the shoulder. The barber says nothing for a long while. Perhaps he is tired. Perhaps his mind is already turning over the leg, the fever, the child's red thread, the household's damp walls. Perhaps all of it together. You're beginning to understand that his trade never truly ends at the threshold. He carries pieces of rooms away with him, the heat of swollen flesh, the smell of honey in a poultice, the look in a mother's face when someone finally tells her what to watch for before dawn. Even now it is hard to tell whether the stranger thing about medieval barbering is the steel or the burden of memory. By the time you reach the town centre again, most shutters are closed. Only a few house lights still show through horn and crack. The alehouse murmur has dimmed to a softer hum. The barber pauses outside his own door, key in hand, rain beading on the iron. Then, from further down the lane, comes another voice calling his name. Bodies, it seems, remain magnificently inconsiderate after dark. The barber stops with the key halfway to his door and turns toward the voice. Not sharply, not with annoyance, only with the tired patience of a man who has already been claimed by the day, often enough to stop pretending the night belongs to him. The lane is nearly dark now. Rain still hangs in the air, though it has thinned to something between mist and memory. A lantern sways from a hook across the street, and beneath its weak light stands a woman wrapped in a cloak darkened by damp. One hand lifted, the other pressed to a basket at her hip as if to steady herself against both weather and purpose. She is not young, though she's not old in the defeated sense either. She has the brisk, weathered composure of someone who has spent years entering rooms where people are frightened and leaving them less so, or at least more organised in their fear. Her shoes are wet to the ankle, her sleeves smell faintly of fennel and rosemary, and from the basket rises a quiet muddle of scents linen, herbs, beeswax, lavender, and something sharper underneath. Perhaps pennyroyal or rue. You know at once what she is before she speaks further, a midwife, or something close enough that the distinction is mostly for quarrels. She comes nearer and says that she has heard he was out by the tanner's cottages, and asks whether he has anything left in the satchel for a woman whose husband thinks a barber ought to look at her wrists and headaches, while the woman herself thinks her husband ought to be put in a sack and floated to France. The midwife's tone suggests she's attended more than one marital opinion with equal professionalism. The barber exhales through his nose. Here, then, is one of the boundaries of his trade, and one of the stranger ones. He treats men often, women sometimes, children whenever necessity tramples custom. But there are domains in medieval life where the barber's hand is welcomed only to the threshold and no farther. Childbirth above all. Women's hidden troubles often belong to women's knowledge, women's labour, women's authority, however unofficial the scholars may consider it. Midwives, mothers, widows, old herb keepers, and practical neighbours carry those territories in memory and in habit. A barber may advise, may pass herbs, may examine what is visible and permitted, but there are rooms where he is not the central figure and should not try to be. No one can quite agree whether this division comes from modesty, custom, competence, distrust, or simply the practical fact that women have long been attending one another perfectly well, without waiting for men with razors to invent the idea, probably all of them together. The midwife shifts the basket and looks at him with steady assessment. She is with child, but not in danger. She says, "Not tonight." Her hands are swollen, her head aches, and she will not stop hauling pails because the geese, the children, and the world in general have sworn against her. The barber nods once. This is not a summons to invade her work. It is a request for overlapping wisdom, a small consultation on the road, professional courtesy in damp wool. He asks whether the woman sees lights, whether the swelling came suddenly, whether she's eaten, whether there is fever. The midwife answers crisply, "No fever, no strange lights, too little rest, too much carrying, too much husband." That last one seems to carry diagnostic force of its own. The barber rummages in the satchel and produces a little packet of dried herbs, mild enough for tea, and a pot of salve for rubbed wrists. He says the wrists may be soothed, the hands raised when she sits, and the husband may carry his own pails for once if God intends him to keep the use of his legs. The midwife's mouth tightens at one corner in what may be approval. Some swear swelling in pregnancy means the child is greedy, others that it means a girl, still others that it means the mother has been admired too strongly by someone with a barren heart. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the old belief served chiefly to comfort, to explain, or to distribute blame artistically around the village. The midwife seems uninterested in most of them. She has the air of a woman who has seen enough actual births to treat folklore like weather occasionally useful to notice, rarely wise to obey. She thanks him, though not warmly. Respect between practitioners is not always tender. It is often made of cautious distance and the recognition that each knows things the other does not. You'll not be needed there, she says, making the boundary kind instead of sharp. The barber inclines his head. I did not assume. A good answer. True, perhaps, and even if not entirely true, properly modest. Medieval cooperation often survives on these small courtesies, on not stepping too boldly into another person's competence. The midwife goes on into the mist, basket swaying, lantern light touching the rim of her hood for a moment before releasing it. You watch her vanish down the lane and think how many professions move quietly through the same dark hours. The barber with his satchel, the midwife with hers, different doors opening to each, different fears waiting within. He unlocks his shop at last and steps inside. The room greets you with its familiar blend of fading warmth, beeswax, wet wool, and the deep ingrained smell of old wood that has seen too many winters to be surprised by one more. The fire is still alive under the ash. The dog circles twice on the rushes and drops down with a sigh, large enough to suggest the day has finally become unreasonable. The barber sets the satchel on the table, unwraps the little parcel of bread and onion given to him at the cottage, and for a few blessed moments it seems the world might permit stillness. It does not, of course. A knock comes before he has even finished banking up the coals. This time the visitor is a woman from the next lane over, wrapped in a brown shawl and carrying a child bundled to the eyes. The little one is not ill in any grand way, only flushed and fussy, coughing in that barky, shallow manner children reserve for night-time when adults are already stretched thin. The mother stands at the threshold with apologetic urgency written all over her face. She will not settle, she says, and my mother says hot onion in a stocking, but my sister says syrup, and our neighbour says a red thread at the neck, and I say I would like all of them to be quiet for 1 minute. The barber actually smiles then, just barely. He lets them in. Now here again the boundaries appear, but softer. He is not the child's main keeper, not her nurse through the night, not the authority older women in the family imagine themselves to be. Yet he is a practical man with calming hands and a tolerance for half the village's remedies, and sometimes that is enough to earn a seat near the fire. He listens to the child's breathing, feels her forehead, asks how long the cough has been there, whether she's taken milk, whether she is roused or dull, whether there is fever enough to frighten or only enough to weary. The mother answers while shifting the little girl on her shoulder. The child watches him with that solemn, slightly offended look sick children give all adults as a class. He advises steam from the hearth, warm drink if she'll take it, rest, and watching the fever through the night. Not too much bundling. Not onion in a stocking unless the household wishes to smell haunted by supper. The mother laughs despite herself, which helps almost as much as the advice. Some swear a thread tied at the throat keeps a cough from dropping to the chest. Others hang herbs by the bed or place a blessed token beneath the pillow. Those who tell the tale never fully agree which part of such customs helps the child, and which part helps the adults feel they are not standing idle before the dark. The barber does not forbid the thread. He only says the steam is likelier to be persuaded by God. The woman thanks him and goes, calmer than she came. Then comes another small crossing of boundaries. A young husband arrives asking in embarrassed circles whether the barber knows anything for women after childbirth, by which he means his wife is exhausted, sore, and furious at being advised 10 contradictory things by 5 older relatives. The barber does not stride off importantly, nor does he pretend sudden expertise in mysteries that belong to others. Instead, he asks who attended the birth. Old Mailer, the husband says. There it is, another woman of the night roads, another keeper of a neighbouring realm. The barber asks whether Maela was satisfied. The husband says yes, mostly, though she also said the wife must rest, which the wife apparently interprets as permission to issue commands from bed with queenly efficiency. The barber says this sounds like excellent recovery and should not be interrupted. He offers a mild salve for cracked skin at the hands and recommends broth, warmth, and obedience to Maela before obedience to anxious cousins. The husband looks relieved, perhaps because what he has truly sought is not treatment but confirmation that the household may safely continue following the midwife rather than every aunt within walking distance. Even now, it is hard to tell how much of medieval healing consists of solving the body and how much consists of sorting the room around it. The barber finally sits with his bread and onion after that, chewing slowly by the fire while the candle gutters lower. You sit with him in the quiet that follows too many voices. Outside, the lane has almost fully gone to sleep. Somewhere a shutter knocks once and stills. Somewhere a dog answers another dog out beyond the wall. The priory bell sounds, and this time the note feels later, softer, farther away. He takes from the table a little roll of linen and begins sorting what remains from the day, fresh strips from used, folded from unfolded, sharp things wrapped well away from dull things. This too is part of the trade, as necessary as any shave or poultice. Tomorrow will need order waiting for it. He rubs goose-fat salve into the cracks at his own knuckles, which have begun to split in the cold. A healer who forgets his own hands does not remain one long. The knock that comes next is not urgent, only tentative. An older woman enters, carrying a small basket of eggs under one arm and a skein of yarn under the other. Payment, clearly, though not for tonight. She has come to settle something from 3 days ago, a salve for a daughter's blistered heel, or perhaps a trimming for a grandson before a feast. In towns like this, coin is only one language among several. Eggs, yarn, a share of smoked fish, a promise to mend a sleeve. These all travel in the economy of care. She sets the basket down and lingers, because payments often carry conversation with them. Soon enough she is speaking of births she has seen, of women who swear by raspberry leaf and women who swear by prayer, and women who swear mostly at their husbands. She mentions a widow 2 lanes over who knows 12 remedies for difficult milk and none for difficult tempers. She speaks of how some men think barbers know everything because they carry blades, while some women think they know too much already and had better stay away from birthing stools unless asked. The barber listens with his usual calm, neither defending his sex nor surrendering his profession, only nodding in the places where agreement costs nothing and pride less. No one can quite agree where a barber's knowledge ends and a midwife's begins. In truth, it probably shifts from village to village, household to household, emergency to emergency. But everyone seems to agree there is a line, and that crossing it unwisely creates more heat than healing. Wisdom in such a world is not only knowing what you can do, it is also knowing what belongs to someone else. The older woman leaves the eggs and yarn. The barber thanks her. The door closes. At last there is only the fire, the dog, the table strewn with folded cloth, and the weariness settling into the room like a final guest. Yet even in this hour the day's pattern remains visible. Hair and blood, herbs and gossip, monks and market folk, noble wrists and labourer teeth, children's coughs and women's complaints, midwives in the rain, and husbands trying very hard not to say the wrong thing about childbirth. The trade is stranger now than it was at dawn, because it has widened. It is not only what the barber does with his own hands, it is the network of other hands around him, especially women's hands, older than apprenticeships and often just as skilled. He works among them, beside them, sometimes in ignorance of what they know, sometimes in quiet partnership, sometimes wisely held at a respectful distance. The candle sinks lower. He rises once more, goes to the door and bars it. At last, truly. The night may belong to him, but tomorrow will not. Already the cold outside has sharpened, and winter is moving closer with all its small domestic tyrannies, chapped fingers, coughs, sore throats, swollen joints, bad sleep, wet wool, hungry children, and the endless household frictions that wear a body down before any great illness ever arrives. The barber knows this. You can see it in the way he looks at the stacked wood, the little salve pots, the folded linen, and the water jug by the hearth. The darker season is coming into his shop one pair of hands at a time. By morning, the rain has passed and left the town rinsed into a brittle, shining cold. Water clings in the cart ruts like narrow strips of pewter, and the thatch roofs steam faintly where the pale sun finds them. You wake to bells again, because in this world bells are less a sound than a condition of life, and today they carry a different energy through the air. Not alarm, not labour exactly, but anticipation. A feast day is nearing, or perhaps already here by local reckoning. And the whole town seems to have remembered overnight that it possesses faces worth presenting to one another. The barber shop stirs early. He has swept the floor more thoroughly than usual. Fresh rushes have been scattered over the worst of yesterday's damp. The brass basin has been polished until it reflects light in a wavering but determined fashion. Even the half-burned candles have been replaced by cleaner ones of better beeswax, filling the room with a sweeter scent than on ordinary mornings. A folded cloth of finer linen than his workaday stock waits on the chair by the shutter, and on the shelf sits a small bottle of rosemary water reserved, you suspect, for customers whose vanity arrives dressed as devotion. Outside, the lane is livelier than a common day deserves. Women pass carrying bundles wrapped in better cloth. Men have cleaned mud from boots as thoroughly as the season allows, which is to say, they have arranged it more selectively. Somewhere nearby a child is already wearing ribbons before breakfast and ruining them with porridge. The dog at the threshold watches all this pageantry with the weary tolerance of someone who preferred everyone equally muddy. The first customer comes while the sun is still low. He's the same ribbon-stall youth from earlier in the week, though today his cap is brushed, his tunic laced more carefully, and his entire manner speaks of destiny at market. He takes the chair with ceremonial gravity and asks the barber to make him orderly, but not severe. A perilous request in any century. The barber drapes him and begins at once. Snip by snip. The beard is refined, the cheeks tidied, the edges persuaded into a shape that suggests he has always looked this way and merely allowed lesser days to obscure the fact. The young man tries not to ask too many questions, fails, and finally wants to know whether girls notice the line of the jaw more than the beard itself. The barber says girls notice whether a man has washed. It is a brutal and useful truth. You watch the scissors move in the morning light, bright on the blades, and notice that today the work carries a different purpose. On ordinary days, men come to the barber to be made decent, soothed, relieved, corrected, or endured. On a feast day, they come to be seen. That is another of the trade's stranger powers. The barber helps construct the face a person offers to the world. Courtship, worship, bargaining, reconciliation, family pride. All of it may begin with a clean jaw and a less disastrous neck. Some swear a man should never cut his hair on the morning of a feast because luck must not be sheared away before blessings are received. Others insist that entering a feast day untrimmed is an insult to both God and neighbour. Those who tell the tale never fully agree, but most manage somehow to combine caution with vanity and visit the barber the evening before or at first light, which appears to satisfy heaven and mirrors alike. The Rippenstall youth leaves transformed enough to endanger his own humility. He is replaced almost at once by a baker's wife bringing her husband, who's been quite clearly ordered to have his beard cut properly before attending dinner at her sister's house. The husband sits with the air of a man personally oppressed by domestic civilization. Flour still dusts one sleeve. His beard has collected crumbs in the night or perhaps entire opinions. The barber regards it with professional calm and begins trimming. As the woman waits by the fire, she talks of the feast preparations underway across town, trenches being cut, ale drawn, smoked fish laid out, pottage thickened, cloaks aired, ribbons bought, children scrubbed to a degree they consider persecution. She says the church will be full, the manor sending down extra bread, and the shrine by the west road newly dressed with winter greenery, because some swear the saint there listens better when not left looking abandoned. The barber listens while working the scissors around the baker's ears. There is something almost ceremonial in all this tidying. Bread baked, tables laid, candles trimmed, faces shaved. Feast days require surfaces to be prepared, not because surfaces are false, but because presentation is one of the age's quiet forms of hope. To wash, mend, polish, and trim is to say that the day matters. No one can quite agree whether medieval people truly lived more closely with ritual than you do, or whether they simply wore it more visibly. A shaved chin before Mass, a ribbon pinned on a child, a better hood clasp brought out from the chest, rushes renewed on the floor, beeswax candles saved for special hours. All these small acts turn time itself into something touchable. The baker, now looking significantly less like a bag of oats with opinions, pays and is taken firmly away by his wife before he can re-enter a flour sack by instinct. Then come two brothers from a nearby holding, both broad-faced, both embarrassed to be here, both claiming their mother said they must be presentable for once in their natural lives. One wants only a trim. The other, after much pretending otherwise, asks for a full shave because there will be dancing after sunset, and he has been informed by sisters, cousins, and one alarming aunt that stubble makes him look like a disappointed hedge. The barber says this may be the most accurate diagnosis he has heard all week. That earns a low laugh, and soon the room fills with a familiar feast day blend of grooming and gossip. News comes in tied to every beard. The Reeves' niece is betrothed. The cooper has bought blue ribbon and claims it is for a saint's image, which no one believes. A pig meant for the common supper escaped twice, and has now acquired public support. Monastery bells will ring longer today. The manor kitchens are already steaming since dawn. Some swear a relic has been brought to the church from another priory and will be displayed by candlelight, though even now it is hard to tell whether it is a genuine saintly fragment or a suspicious bone that has simply travelled with confidence. The barber moves from chin to chin, cheek to cheek, and the room grows warm with steam, talk, and the smell of soap. A child appears next, dragged by the hand and protesting with the full constitutional vigour of youth. He is to have his hair cut before the service. This, to him, is obviously the cruelest development since winter. He climbs into the chair with a face like an insulted prince, while his mother stands by promising reward she almost certainly does not possess. The barber handles him with brisk mercy. A cloth is tied, a comb runs through the hair, the scissors begin. Snip, snip, snip. Little locks tumble onto the linen and the rushes. The child endures with heroic grievance until the barber says if he sits still enough, his ears may remain where God originally placed them. The child freezes at once, scandalized into obedience. His mother bites her lip to stop laughing. Some swear a child's hair should be kept after a feast day cutting and tucked into the family chest or sewn into a pillow seam to guard health through the winter. Others burn it in the hearth so birds cannot take it for nests and give the child wandering thoughts or weak memory. Those who tell the tale never fully agree. The mother here gathers the clippings carefully anyway, which tells you enough. In uncertain seasons, people make room for caution. By late morning, the whole lane seems to flow toward the barber's door in better cloth and greater urgency. A carter wants his beard shortened before seeing a girl's father. A widow wants her grandson's hair tidied because he will carry a candle in procession and must not look like a stable accident. A servant from the manor brings word that 2 pages are to be clipped at the neck before attendance in hall. Even a lay brother from the monastery arrives requesting a quick refining of the tonsure line for one elderly monk who, he says with faint apology, has become visibly circular in the wrong manner. The barber accepts them all. You begin to see that on days like this he is not merely correcting untidiness. He's helping people enter public ritual in the proper skin. The face matters in community life. To appear neat is to show respect for the feast, for the household, for the church, for the hosts, for the dead remembered, for the living hope to impress. In a time when cloth is dear, mirrors poor, and baths not always close at hand. The barber's art becomes one of the few accessible ways ordinary people can feel briefly polished. The room turns merry by degrees. Not loud, not modern, not jarring to the sleepy rhythm of your journey, but lighter. Even the barber's dry remarks come more often now. When a man asks if rosemary water will make his beard more handsome, the barber says it will make it more expensive. When a page frets that his fringe looks uneven, the barber replies that all pages look uneven by nature, and the haircut cannot improve on God too aggressively. When a grandmother insists her grandson's cowlick is caused by moonlight through a cracked shutter, the barber answers that moonlight has much to answer for but may not be fully guilty here. Around noon, bells sound longer and fuller, and the lane outside fills with people moving toward church. You stand at the threshold for a moment and watch them pass. Fur-lined cloaks, wool hoods brushed clean, pilgrim badges pinned bright, children with scrubbed faces and suspiciously clean ears, women carrying baskets covered in linen, men touching newly shaved cheeks as though to reassure themselves the work remains in place. The whole town has become, for a few hours, more deliberate about its own appearance. The barber pauses too, one hand resting on the back of the chair. He watches a little girl skip past with a ribbon tied into her braids and a slice of coarse bread in her fist. He watches the cooper, jaw heeled, walking proudly beside a woman in a green hood. He watches the baker's wife steering her husband toward dignity at a sustainable speed. And in that pause you can feel the quieter side of his calling. He has helped make this visible order, not by grandeur, not by sermon, not by wealth, by scissors, water, soap, cloth, and the old patient skill of making people ready for one another. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether feast days reveal the best of medieval life or merely polish its roughness for a little while. But standing in the doorway of the barber's shop, with bells overhead and the town passing dressed in its best intentions, you suspect the distinction may not matter. The polishing is real too, the care is real, the effort counts. And as the last of the morning customers leaves smelling faintly of rosemary and satisfaction, the barber turns back into the candlelit room to tidy his tools, because by evening the ribbons will be loosened, the dancing done, The candles burned low and faces, like feast days, will need tending again. By evening, the feast day has softened into its worn, human second half, and the whole town seems to exhale through damp wool and tired candles. The bells that rang so proudly at noon now sound farther off, rounded by dusk and smoke and the long ache of standing, walking, talking, carrying, serving, smiling, bowing, and pretending all day that your boots are not quietly full of cold. Festive hours, like all hours, eventually settle back into the body, and the body, as the barber knows better than most, always sends its bill. The shop is open again, though not as brightly as in the morning. The finer linen has been folded away. The better candles are still burning, but lower now, their sweet beeswax scent mingling with wet wool, rosemary water, and the iron warmth of a hearth built up for night. Outside, the lane glistens under a sky the colour of old pewter. Bits of feast-day greenery have fallen into the mud. Somewhere nearby a fiddle scrapes bravely in an alehouse room, not badly enough to stop and not well enough to remember. Children, who were ribbons and polish only hours ago, are once more mud at the hem and crumbs at the mouth. The barber stands at the table, sleeves rolled, sorting cloths. His hands look different in evening light. You notice it more clearly now. The knuckles are split in two places despite the goosefat salve. The fingertips are reddened from washing in cold water, then warm, then cold again. There is a nick near the thumb healed badly over some earlier day's haste. A little callus sits where the razor rests against the grip. These are not noble hands, nor monkish hands, nor merchant hands. They are hands worn by repetition and by care. Much of his trade depends on their remaining supple, precise, and unshaken, which means winter is not merely unpleasant for him, it is occupational opposition. The first evening visitor is a servant girl from the manor with a cloth wrapped around one wrist. She is flushed with cold and embarrassment, and you suspect from the moment she steps in that the wound is smaller than her concern, but larger than what she's been able to admit while trying to work through supper service. The barber sits her near the fire and unwinds the cloth. The skin at the wrist is rubbed raw where a stiff cuff or carrying strap has worked at it half the day. There's also a shallow burn at the base of the thumb from a dish handle or kettle rim. Nothing grave. Everything painful. Exactly the sort of thing feast days manufacture in quantity, while everyone is too busy smiling at one another to pause. The barber cleans it, rubs in salve, and binds it lightly. "Keep it from hot water if you can," he says. The girl gives him a look that says this advice belongs to a parallel universe in which kitchen work obeys preference. He sees it too and adds, "Then keep it from hotter water than necessary." That, at least, earns a faint smile. She leaves with the hand cradled against her apron and a weariness in her shoulders that reminds you how many people spend feast days making comfort for others and receive very little of it themselves. Soon after comes a pair of stable lads from the manor yard, sent down by someone sensible before things worsen. One has a split at the corner of his nail, red and swollen from grime and cold. The other has chafed fingers where wet rains and rough leather have scraped his skin open across the joints. The barber handles both with the same economy he has shown all day: wash, inspect, salve, bind, warn. Less water if filthy, more drying if possible. Keep them warm. Do not pick at them. And if they begin to throb by morning, come back before they become ambitious. Some swear cracked skin opens the body to winter ague, while others think it merely lets the devil of cold crawl in finger by finger. Even now it's hard to tell whether medieval people feared winter itself as a season or as 1,000 small invasions into hands, lungs, Joints, sleep, tempers, and stores, probably both. Winter is rarely one enemy when it can be many. The shop quiets after they go, and for a little while only the ordinary sounds remain: fire shifting in the grate, rainwater dripping from the eaves outside, the dog turning once on the rushes, the faint jangle of harness somewhere in the lane. The barber sits at last on the bench by the hearth and stretches one hand, then the other, flexing the fingers open and shut. A small thing, a tired thing, but it says more than complaint would. He has spent the day trimming feast day beards, soothing coughs, binding wrists, answering questions about swelling, checking children's foreheads, and standing at thresholds between discomfort and something a little better. No grand miracle anywhere in it, only repeated usefulness. That is exhausting in its own distinct way. A knock sounds. This time it is the cooper again, but not for himself. He has brought his mother. She's wrapped in 2 shawls and moves with the careful stubbornness of someone who considers pain vulgar, but has finally been persuaded to acknowledge it as a practical nuisance. Her hands are knotted with swollen joints, red across the knuckles and pale at the fingertips. The skin stretched tight where the cold has bitten hardest. She says only that the weather is in them, which is how older people in every century win arguments with entire systems of medicine. The barber seats her by the fire and takes her hands gently. Here the trade becomes quieter still. No cutting, no pulling, no spectacle. Only warming cloths and rubbing in salve made thick with fat, beeswax and herbs, then wrapping the hands in linen so the heat lingers. The old woman closes her eyes for a moment as he works. The cooper looks away, embarrassed by tenderness performed in public. That too is timeless. No one can quite agree whether aching joints come from damp air, old injury, age itself, bad blood, or the memory of every winter a body has already endured. Some say the moon worsens them. Some blame sleeping near outer walls. Some mutter that old bones simply grow wiser about weather than the sky admits. The barber offers no theory. He only warms, rubs, wraps, and tells her to sit close to the hearth tonight if anyone in her house has the sense to keep a place for her. The cooper pays in coin and promises a small measure of seasoned wood later in the week. Again the sideways economy of care. Again the town quietly holding itself together. Then comes a weaver with a cough that has lingered long enough to breed opinion. He is thin, stooped from his work, and wrapped in a cloak that smells of lanolin and damp looms. He insists it is nothing, which means of course it is something if not danger, then at least enough trouble to bring him out after dark. The barber listens to the chest, asks about fever, phlegm, sleep, appetite, night sweats, all with the gentle directness of someone who has learned which answers matter and which only dramatize. The cough sounds rough, but not drowning, troublesome but not yet sinister. The barber recommends warmth, steam, thin ale or broth, and a syrup of honey and herbs if one can be made. The weaver asks whether hanging a pilgrim badge over the bed might help. The barber says it may encourage the bed to feel better about its responsibilities. That is one of the driest jokes of the week, and because the weaver laughs, it probably does help. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether winter illness is made worse by weather, hunger, indoor smoke, poor sleep, old buildings, damp bedding, too much ale, too little ale, or the simple fatigue of surviving until spring. The answer, as always, appears to be yes. Medieval winters are not one hardship. They are a conspiracy of smaller ones. The barber moves through the evening cases in this way, and each reveals another side of the season pressing in. A child with split lips from cold wind, a woman whose shoulders burn from carrying water and stirring kettles through feast preparation, a watchman whose heel has blistered under wet leather, a young monk sent from the priory with hands so chapped they bleed at the creases every time he turns a page. The barber salves them all. He does not transform the season. He merely gives people a little more margin against it. Even now, it is hard to tell whether that margin is small or immense. At one point, when the room is empty again, he takes up his own little pot of salve and works it into the cracks at the base of his fingers more carefully than before. The dog watches, unimpressed by self-maintenance but willing to tolerate it. On the shelf above the hearth sits the little store of what keeps the cold at bay as best it can, folded cloths. 2 stoppered jars of ointment, 1 bundle of dried herbs, a packet of salt, beeswax stubs, and the water jug wrapped at the neck with cloth so it does not chill the hand too sharply. A poor man's arsenal against a rich season's demands. Outside, the lane has gone almost still. Feast day is ending. People are going home to beds, benches, pallets, shared blankets, and draughty corners. Leftovers are being covered, fires are being banked. Children are finally asleep in tangles of warm exhaustion. Somewhere a song drifts faint and off-key, then breaks apart in laughter. Somewhere else a woman is airing a grievance she politely saved until guests had gone. The barber's final call of the evening is a cartwright with a swollen ankle. He has twisted it in mud outside the gate and spent too long pretending he had not. He hobbles in with the angry dignity of a man betrayed by ordinary ground. The barber unwraps the boot, examines the ankle, and finds no obvious break, only swelling, heat, and the beginning of deep bruising. Cloths are warmed, the joint bound, the leg raised on the bench. The cartwright complains that tomorrow's work cannot wait. The barber replies that tomorrow's work may prefer a man who can still stand on Thursday. A good point, though one labour rarely accepts until forced. Some swear sprains mend better if bound with herbs and muttered words said while tying the knot. Others believe only in rest and vinegar cloths. The cartwright, like most honest men in pain, seems prepared to believe in all of it so long as none of it requires dancing. When he has gone, the barber closes the shutters fully. At last the room narrows into true night. Candlelight gilds the basin and leaves the corners in soft dark. The fire sinks lower. The barber sits by it with his sleeves down now, cloak around his shoulders, hands extended to the heat. He looks older in this light than he did in the morning, not by years but by labour. There is no self-pity in him, no dramatic collapse, only the plain fatigue of a man whose usefulness has been spent generously all day and must somehow be renewed by dawn. You think then of the outline of his whole calling as it has unfolded around you, not merely hair and not merely wounds, not merely razors and not merely remedies. A medieval barber becomes, over time, the keeper of a town's smaller thresholds between untidy and presentable, pain and relief, swelling and bandage, rumour and practical answer, winter and one more day endured. That is stranger than you first imagined because it is humbler. You may have expected theatrical medicine, colourful superstition, dramatic bloodletting, and yes, those have come. But what remains strongest now is the quieter dignity of his trade, the endless modest repairs, the countless little rescues from discomfort, the way his hands move without needing to be praised, the way he belongs equally to feast days, ordinary mornings, dark cottages, monastery rooms, and cold shops by the lane. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether such men were respected enough at their time. Perhaps not. Useful people often are not, until they are absent. But tonight, as winter presses its face to the shutters and the barber warms his worn hands by the fire, you understand that the oddity of his calling is inseparable from its dignity. Soon the colder weeks will settle fully over the town. The mornings will sharpen, the coughs will deepen or pass, the joints will complain louder, the floors will feel harder, the blankets thinner, the bells more distant through frost, and still the barber's door will open, and still people will come, carrying into his light all the small burdens a body can gather. He will meet them one by one. He will meet them one by one, and now you remain with him long enough to see the colder season settle properly over the town, not in one grand storm, but in the slow, persuasive way winter always chooses when it wants to prove a point. Morning after morning the air sharpens. Frost gathers along the lower edges of doors and clings white to cart shafts left in the yard. The river mist comes later and lingers longer. Cloaks grow heavier, hands disappear deeper into sleeves. Every stone floor in every room seems to remember how to hold cold more faithfully than warmth. The barber's shop changes with the season, though the room itself remains small, narrow, and blackened in the rafters exactly as before. The hearth is fed earlier and more often. The water jug sits closer to the fire so that washing does not become an act of courage. Cloths are hung where they may warm. Extra rushes are spread near the chair. Little pots of salve stand ready on the shelf like patient soldiers' goose fat, beeswax, herbs steeped in oil, humble defences against the annual siege laid by wind and damp. The brass basin catches winter light now, which is paler than autumn light and less forgiving. People come in carrying the season on them. A reeve with cracked lips and a neck stiff from riding before dawn. A dairymaid whose hands are so chapped the skin has opened at the knuckles. A boy with a nose running constantly from the cold, and the determined belief that this is an injury deserving public sympathy. A widow with a cough that has grown no worse but no kinder either. A priest whose ears have reddened to the colour of wax seals, and who asks, in embarrassed circles, whether anything may be done for chilblains on his toes without involving public shame. The barber does for all of them what can be done: warmth, cloth, salve, steam, binding, trimming, listening, brief instructions repeated in patient tones. No one can quite agree whether winter brings out the worst in the body or merely reveals what the warmer months let people ignore. Old aches return. Poor teeth complain louder. Bad sleep deepens. Smoke from low fires settles in lungs. Damp bedding steals warmth before dawn. Even those who are not ill become worn. In such a season, the barber's shop becomes less a place of occasional repair and more a refuge of small corrections against general decline. And still there is grooming. That may be the most quietly human detail of all. Even in cold weather, even in hardship, even when fingers ache and roads rot and pottage grows monotonous enough to acquire political significance, men still want beards tidied. Hair still grows at the neck. Monks still require their crowns kept orderly. Pages must look neat in hall. Merchants still smooth their appearance before winter trade. The world does not stop needing faces simply because the wind has become rude. One morning before sunrise, while frost still lies on the lane like powdered glass, the barber stands by the shutter shaving an old man who has come in wrapped to the chin in a patched cloak. The man's beard is thin now, more memory than abundance, but he insists on being properly seen before attending a manor court where some tenant matter is to be settled. The barber warms the cloth, softens the stubborn whiskers, and clears the cheeks with slow, exact strokes. The old man watches the faint reflection in the brass basin and says he feels half his courage comes from having his face arranged before speaking to officials. The barber replies that the other half should come from being right, though he seems to know as well as the customer that appearance often reaches the room first. Those who tell the tale never fully agree whether barbers trade in vanity or confidence, but by now you understand the truth is gentler than either. He trades in readiness. He helps people feel a little more gathered before they step back into the weather or into one another's judgment. A lay brother from the monastery comes through next, breath smoking in the doorway, to ask for more salve for cracked hands in the scriptorium and a quick neatening of a tonsure before the feast of some saint, whose name the barber hears every year and never bothers to store properly. The lay brother also brings, wrapped in cloth, a small gift from the infirmary, dried herbs and a little jar of honey, repayment for earlier kindness in winter's other half language. Then the cooper arrives with wood as promised. Then the old woman with the swollen joint sends eggs again. Then a kitchen servant from the manor comes for salve and stays to warm her hands over the fire longer than strictly necessary, because some days warmth itself is treatment enough. The web of exchange has grown so ordinary now that it no longer feels like payment at all. It feels like the town remembering itself. Even now, it is hard to tell whether the barber belongs to the town because he serves it, or whether the town has adopted him because it knows, without saying so, how much of itself has passed under his hands. By late afternoon, one of those clean winter dusks descends, the kind where the sky turns silver behind bare branches, and the first smoke from evening fires lies low along the lane. The barber has seen the day through its usual little procession, a blistered heel, a shaving for supper at the manor, a child's splinter, a monk's chapped fingers, a merchant's overgrown beard, a drover's cough, one argument about whether sage helps sore throats, and another about whether haircut on a saint's day grows back with better manners. He has answered what he could, ignored what he should, and laughed only where laughter helps. Now, at the end of it all, he closes the shutter. The room folds into candlelight and hearth glow. The brass basin dims, the iron-bound chest is latched, the leech jar sits quiet on the shelf. Outside, footsteps pass more slowly, and then fewer at all. The dog is asleep before the fire, paws twitching faintly as if chasing something more satisfying than real life usually offers. The barber sits on the bench with his hands around a cup of warmed ale, shoulders bent not by defeat, but by earned weariness. You look around this small room one last time and see all the versions of it layered together. Dawn smoke and wet boots, market chatter, bloodletting by candlelight, noble wool in the gatehouse, monastery stone and shaved crowns, tooth iron and boiled cloth, alehouse laughter, rain-dark cottage walls, red thread on a child's wrist, feast day rosemary water, winter salve rubbed into split knuckles. The room has held vanity, fear, relief, gossip, prayer, stubbornness, and pain, and somehow made space for all of them without becoming grander than it is. That, perhaps, is the final strangeness of the medieval barber. He's never only one thing: groomer, healer, listener, witness, practical philosopher of the body, keeper of blades and warm cloths, neighbour to monks, servants, merchants, widows, children, and men too proud to admit where it hurts, until it hurts too much. He lives where appearance meets necessity, where custom meets discomfort, where superstition and experience sit on the same stool and wait to see which one the day will require. And he does it all in a little room smelling of smoke, soap, and winter, under rafters blackened by years no one has written down. The fire settles lower. The barber leans back slightly, and for the first time since you entered his world, there is truly nothing waiting at the door. So the night may soften now. The lane outside grows still under frost and dim starlight hidden behind thin cloud. The bells, when they ring, sound farther away, as if wrapped in wool. The shutters hold the cold at bay just enough. The candle burns with a small steady flame. The dog sleeps deeper. The barber's hands, finally empty, rest open on his knees. There's no need to hurry anywhere, no jaw to inspect, no cloth to warm, no anxious knock pulling him back into the wet dark. And as the room settles around you, all the sharp edges of the day begin to blur. The brass basin no longer gleams but glows. The iron tools are only shapes now, quiet and harmless in shadow. The rushes underfoot smell faintly sweet. Smoke curls lazily toward the rafters and disappears into the old black wood. Beyond the walls, the town itself seems to drift towards sleep stables hushed, kitchens banked, cloaks hung, boots set by doors, children gathered under blankets, old people easing themselves carefully onto pallets and benches. The last murmurs of supper and prayer thinning into silence. You can let the medieval world grow dim now. Let the monastery bells recede into mist. Let the market square empty itself of voices and hoofbeats. Let the gatehouse torches gutter low. Let the pilgrim road vanish into frost. Let the manor hall go dark behind oak doors. Let the little roadside shrines stand quietly under winter branches with their ribbons still. Let the half-burned candle finally surrender its light. Let the smell of rosemary, beeswax, and warm cloth drift softer and softer until it is only a memory of comfort. And in that quiet, you may rest. You have walked the muddy lanes, sat by the smoky hearths, listened to bells before dawn and laughter at eventide, watched blades flash and salve spread, felt the cold stone, the river mist, the damp straw, the hush of cloisters, the murmur of alehouses, the weary tenderness of small mercies given again and again. You have seen how strange this life is, and also how ordinary, how rough the world can be, and how gently people still try to mend one another inside it. So now the fire sinks lower, the shadows lengthen, and the town is no longer asking anything of you. There is only warmth enough, darkness enough, and the slow comfort of knowing that behind one shuttered window, a tired barber has finished his work at last. Sleep can come gently now,